And I will ask our board secretary to take a roll call vote or a roll call to establish a quorum.
Thank you. President Craighead,
Here.
Member Lopez,
Present.
Member Otto,
Here.
and Student Member Arroyo.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's see, do we have any public testimony? Anybody who's here to speak?
I don't have any sheets. No.
Okay, we have no speakers, so that means we're going to get right into the conversation, which is great because I know we're going to have a very full and robust conversation on monitoring, and this is our goal monitoring kickoff. So let's jump right in. Dr. Baker.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Glad to kick off this conversation about the year of goal monitoring around board goals. And so I'm going to just share a few things as we kick off, and then we have a whole team that will be leading in the discussion today. And I'll wait for my slides to come up. Great, thank you. Thank you, team behind the scenes. And also just take a moment to thank our team that helps to make today possible behind the scenes with all of the translation and interpretation and the media that makes today possible. So thank you, all of you who are behind the scenes. Appreciate you. I also know that Dr. Benitez and Mr. Miller will be joining us. One is coming from a school and the other will be joining us from his responsibilities. So pleased to kick off today a conversation around monitoring. And I want to just take us back. This is an important moment in our student outcome focused governance journey. In particular, last year, right around this time, the board was finishing its contemplation around its goals and guardrails. We had already kicked off the year and set and established district goals. But in November of last year, the board approved its goals, which was really monumental in thinking about alignment and coherence of all that we're working on in the district. It's also a moment to really think about the board's vision. Vision 2035 had been approved, so I'm going to speak briefly about our work related to Vision 2035. And it allowed us last year to continue the practice of monitoring goals. So we didn't have all of the opportunity for alignment of board goals down into district goals, but we did have an opportunity to prepare monitoring reports, to hear from our research office, and actually to introduce new ways of looking at data that included stories and hearing from district staff and others about their work in schools. So today is a continuation of that, but a really important time for us to think about this new year and in a different way, and to talk about alignment. In that spirit, this diagram or this illustration has become really important to us, and so it will be referenced in several different ways through today's presentation. And I just want to share a few things about it, and then it will come back to it to reflect on the work that you're going to hear about today. Most importantly, today is an opportunity to think about coherence and all of the relationships that exist between the board's work. The board's work being setting a vision, the Vision 2035 that was approved by you, including the portraits, a graduate, adult, and a systems portrait, and core values. The board's work of setting goals and guardrails. The board's work of approving and monitoring the process of developing an LCAP. And then hearing from staff about a strategic plan. That relates to the staff's work. And when I think about student outcome focused governance, one of the things that is very clear and helpful is really thinking strategically about what is the board's work to do and what is the staff's work to do, and how do we work in tandem with one another to attain the goals that the board sets. The staff's work, you'll see and you'll hear from us about elements of our strategic plan. You heard extensively in the spring about the strategies embedded into the LCAP process, which then came to you for approval. And today you're going to hear us speak specifically around adult inputs. Adult inputs that are ways of thinking about every adult in our system in relation to attaining the goals that you have set in the vision and in your board goals and in the district goals that we have set. I want to just make note that there are a number of us sitting around the table that represent all different aspects of our work across the entire district, as well as having not only adult board members, but a student board member, all of these voices are important to the conversation today. And while we're going to highlight some specific bodies of work, I'll just invite my colleagues and for the board to interact with anyone who you're curious how their work and their departments influences what we're talking about today. But we will be really specific about some of the things that we're going to share today in this opportunity. And then just thinking, just retrospectively, I know that you know these things, but these 6 elements come up around student outcome focused governance, and they are the elements that actually make up the body of work of student outcome focused governance. So today you'll see monitoring and accountability highlighted, because today is a conversation around the alignment between vision, the reality of what our students face, and then thinking about how we are monitoring and holding our system accountable for the results that you have set in the board goals. And specifically, we've talked a lot in the monitoring reports about student outcomes. You've heard an end-of-year report. Last spring, we attempted to do monitoring reports on your new goals and guardrails. We actually last month provided the last installation of data around student outcomes from last year's goals. So this is a continued conversation, but today the highlight is really thinking about adult inputs and what we as staff are planning and have already activated on in our plans for this year. Not just plans, but plans that are related to the data that you have seen. So it's a really nice opportunity for us as we get into the school year to set up a system where you are aware of elements of the strategic plan and especially of key levers that you'll hear about today that are planned, research-based, and planned to influence the student outcomes that you have observed. A question that I was thinking about that is very related to that is, how do adults need to be equipped to meet the needs that the data reflects? So it's easy to be talking about data as if nothing has to change in order to change that data, but what we know is from the boardroom to the classroom, we all have to be equipped to address the data that is in our student needs. And so today you're going to hear our team talk about the way that we're equipping ourselves, the way that we're thinking about supports for teachers, for principals, and for those who serve our students in new ways and refined ways. Some of the ways that we're thinking about our work they're not going to sound completely new, but the way that we're monitoring and holding our system accountable has elements of refinement to them based on our student data. Much of what you have experienced in student outcome focused governance monitoring has been about looking back and monitoring progress from the data that is before you, looking at the reports for goals 1 and 2, goals 3 and 4, and really thinking about what the reality is for students and then what the student needs are, so that in many cases, the gap between the vision that you hold and your goals and guardrails and then the reality of what our students actually are experiencing and what they face in schools. And so today should feel different. This should also feel like a moment where we're between sets of data. So we actually just have our very first set of data incoming around our student pulse survey data, which isn't related to board goals and guardrails, but to our district goals. And while we're in between space, we are setting for the future. And so these questions that are here come from student outcome focused governance model from the handbook, which will feel familiar to you. I'll just kind of hold up the 4 areas of questioning. Most of them have to do with the past, the who, what, and why. And today we'll focus on which changes will happen based on the data. So you can see some of the sample questions. What have we learned from some of our efforts, given what we know about an area? What are we going to do to accelerate student progress? How are we going to address a specific area that we see our students facing? How might changes show up in the future in terms of budget or other strategies? And then lastly, how can the board support these efforts? So very much future-facing as we kick off this school year. And again, this is a wonderful opportunity for us to think about the alignment between what we see in our student needs from the boardroom, from all of the reports that you've received, to our classrooms. I'll be super brief. If, as much as anything, this is a reminder to our community that the district spent a year harvesting data and to working with our community around its vision, which then came to the board for approval. This vision was a compilation of inputs from students at our Student Summit and then throughout the year, community stakeholders, other stakeholders, parents, caregivers, and others who wanted to help reimagine education in Long Beach Unified School District. The vision that you approved, there we go. The 4 components are core values, which are before you. And I hope that you'll actually hear some of these core values represented in the work that we're going to share today. And then at the center of what we want for our students, thinking about the graduate portrait and the elements within the graduate portrait that are not just about data, they are about ways of being and how we want our students to represent themselves when they graduate from Long Beach Unified School District. When we think about students, the shifts that need to happen for adults, and what do our adults need to be nurtured to become everything that we see in this adult portrait, which is part of our community's vision for who adults will be. And I just want to pause on that because when we think about adults in the system, it's easy to think about teachers because teachers have the greatest impact on our students. We're talking about all adults in our system, and I'll speak briefly in a moment about how every adult in our system has had an opportunity to engage and to think about their connection to the graduate portrait in new ways as we've kicked off this school year. And then the last element of the vision includes the system portrait. There we go. The system portrait represents if we want our graduates to be different, our adults need to be different, and they're surrounded by a system. And so we are deep in work around changing the system in service to what our students need and what the vision is for our district. And then just briefly, because it will come back up, you'll hear about key levers and other aspects of our plan. Can you forward the slides? I don't think the clicker's working. Thank you. And actually, you can go forward to the next slide. I'm going to talk briefly about strategic plan. So you're going to hear us talk about key levers today, which are elements of our strategic plan. And just in thinking about a strategic plan, again, back to the work of the board and the work of staff, the Vision 2035 was approved by the board, really thinking about the community's vision for schools and reimagining what the community that you represent wants for our students in core values, graduate portrait, adult portrait, and system portrait. Our strategic plan, Creating a Better Future Together, is the work of staff to actualize and to meet the goals that you all have set for our district. It is the vision, taking your vision and putting it into action. And I hope today what you'll be reminded of, I know that you know this, but what you'll be reminded of is each of the 9 strategies, we're not going through all of them today, but each of them represents work that was done through the visioning process, a set of strategies that went through a racial equity index to determine which should be the highest priorities and focus our first strategic plan that connects to Vision 2035. They went through a prioritization analysis. And so just a reminder that the 9 strategies that exist within our strategic plan have been incredibly scrutinized as aspects of work that we believe with shifts in particular for adults, that empower adults, that equip adults to meet the needs of our students, have the greatest opportunity for success for our students. And then I just want to bring you back to a really important image. Our why is our students. So when you think of our strategic plan and our vision, we center on our why for students. Easy to say and sometimes harder to do when we think about the why. We often are faced with thinking about adults in service to students, but I want to bring us back today to our why for students. The 9 strategies in our strategic plan, which you're going to interact with around today, are the how. These are adult inputs and thinking about what do we need to be different for adults in service to our students. And then lastly, our what. Our what is, so if our why is our students, our how is our strategic plan, the reimagined is thinking about board goals and guardrails and the alignment of our district goals and the portraits of what we are trying to reimagine in Long Beach Unified School District. We are in year 2 of our strategic plan. Actually, we kicked off last year and had early implementation. I know you'll recall some of what was shared with you through our board workshop in the summer. But this year we actually had a district-wide experience. So just to think about adult inputs differently than you might have in the past, every adult in our system this year, regardless of job title, classified, certificated staff, has had an experience making a connection to the adult portrait and thinking about what their commitment is, whether they're a direct line to students because they interact in classrooms or on school campuses, or a dotted line because they are serving meals, creating a safe environment in their work as school safety or custodial teams. Everyone has an opportunity to connect, and that's why all of us in this room represent divisions of work that are connecting to what we want for our students. When we think about the strategic plan, there are 4 themes. And I want to enter into just this reminder with this question in mind. How do adults need to grow and change to meet the needs that our student data reflects? Because today you're going to hear many different ways that we're working to grow and support and change as adults in service to what our student data reflects in these areas. And I know this is just a reminder, but it centers us on the themes of the strategic plan, which are high quality learning for students, equitable and liberatory district with strategies under that, partnering with community, and lastly, cultivating transformative change. And I just offer these as a reminder of thinking about adult inputs, which we are going to talk about today in service to our students. And then back to this diagram. In many ways, it's easier to talk about this diagram as a theory of action. And so as we come back to this today, I want you just to think about the inputs, the adult inputs of what we're doing is if we, then the outputs will change. They will result in changes in the system, which will change what students know and are able to do, and represented in your board goals and our district goals and that vision. And so we just want to continue to come back to this as an illustration of how all of this works together, because what we know is organizations and educational organizations that think about coherence and work really intentionally around coherence so that what teachers are experiencing is related to what principals are experiencing, is related to what principal supervisors are experiencing, that we build coherence in a system so that we're all aiming in the same direction, supported by one another, with a focus, especially in this case, on the goals that the board has set as an anchor for the vision of our district. And so with that in mind, I'm going to turn to Brian to kick off the work of the academic office and then to engage colleagues. Are there any questions that you want to ask me as we make the transition? All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, sir. All right, well, good morning. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm excited about, as I was listening to Jill share some of the grounding us in the vision and our strategic plan. There were 3 words that I heard her say that I wrote down that I think are going to be really important over the next hour or so. She talked about coherence and the idea that whether it's from the boardroom to the classroom, that there's coherence of goals and understanding what that looks like, that across level offices and curriculum offices and the research office, that we're talking the same language, that we're working towards the same purpose. I heard strategic, and the things we're going to talk about today are not random decisions, are not random plans, but very strategic. And in fact, Jill, I appreciate you pointing out the 4 themes of our strategic plan. I believe that we'll be addressing all 4 of those themes today, not intentionally, but because the work that we're doing is aligned to the themes of our strategic plan. So we didn't set up this presentation to align to the strategic plan, but our work does align across all 4 themes. And then the third word I heard was alignment. So coherence and alignment, we talk about those sometimes interchangeably, but that idea that, again, the work that is happening in this boardroom, the work that you all are setting as a vision through the board goals, that we bring those down into district goals, and what does that flow down look like? You'll hear from our levels, what then do we communicate with our principals and our teachers about expectations for their actions and student outcomes as a result of that alignment across? What does that alignment look like in a curriculum office where we then are asking our coaches to train our teachers in alignment with the goals that we've set. So coherence, strategic, and alignment should hopefully 3 concepts that you'll hear woven throughout today. You all likely will remember that for several years we had the great privilege to be able to work with the Wallace Foundation. And the Wallace Foundation at that time was helping us to build out our leadership pipeline, to help us build out our principal supervisor work in support of principals. And through research that the Wallace Foundation uplifted, this quote was something that I pulled back I thought would be important for us to just ground ourselves in. The quote says, "Leadership," and in this context we're talking school leaders, "leadership is second only to classroom instruction, teachers, among all school-related factors that contribute to student learning." So while that may seem obvious to folks in education, I think it's good to remind our parents and community at home as well. Of course, our teachers are the greatest factor impacting student achievement. They're with our students every day in the classroom. But the second greatest factor in the research is our school leaders, our principals. And so when we think about if we're going to create then really strong outcomes for students, and we're talking about coherence and alignment, we need to make sure that what we're sharing with our teachers around expectations for their work is aligned with what we're sharing with our principals, that our principals are supporting the work coming out of the curriculum office, that our teachers are being trained on. Without that strong coherence between what teachers and principals are expected to know and do, we're not going to have those same outcomes. And so this triangle here, if you will, of the work of the Chief Academic Office is really bringing that alignment and coherence between the level offices, the curriculum office, and with the support of our research office. So you all have several times now heard from Dr. Madrigal and her team to help us look at our outcomes and make some determination of are we making the appropriate progress. So the progress that we monitor through the research office, the work that we do in our curriculum office to support our teachers, and then the work we do in our level offices primarily to support our principals, all in that coherence and alignment framework. So I'm going to come back to this visual that Jill shared with us a few moments ago, but I'm going to slightly reframe it for the work you'll hear over the next 45 minutes or so. So our why is always our students. We're continuing to ground our students as our why. When Dr. Baker was sharing a moment ago, when she talked about the how, she uplifted our strategic plan. We're dropping down a level right now, so the strategic plan is a broad vision for our district, the work across our district, across departments. We're going to drop down now just a little level into the kind of the work within the Chief Academic Office. So the work happening in our schools, the work happening in our Office of Curriculum Instruction and Professional Development. And so within that, we've identified through our senior team, we've identified a few key priorities and levers that we think will most likely uplift those priorities, make those priorities a reality. And so I know it's a little bit small on the screen. You can see it in front of you, though, but I'll read it for folks at home maybe struggling to read it. So key priorities: culturally responsive and sustaining leader and teacher practice. And it's intentional for both leader and teacher, going back to that work from Wallace, that if we don't have the alignment between what our leaders are doing and what our teachers are doing, we're not going to have the outcomes we want. We're also looking at culturally affirming classroom and school environments. So priorities of how do we create the environments where students and staff and adults are feeling safe, they feel like they belong, they feel like they can express and develop the agency we want them. And then how do we make sure that our teachers, our principals, and our other leaders on our campuses are creating the instructional practices and the leadership practices that allow for culturally responsiveness, culturally sustaining opportunities, culturally relevance broadly through the work of Gloria Latson-Billings. And we're continuing to learn about this ourselves. So while the adults are expected to be supporting our students, the adults are also learning. And you'll hear a little bit from both David and from Ed about how we're actually helping our principals and, frankly, our senior team to continue to deepen our knowledge around these concepts. So if that's our how, then our what are what you all have heard a lot about. These are our district goals, our board goals. We've taken, and you'll see this as we flow down in a moment, from our from our board goals that you all are very familiar with. We've then grouped into some district goals that are just slightly broader around literate and mathematically prepared students, resilient and mindful students through transformative social emotional learning, and college and career ready graduates. So that same framework, if we ground our why and our graduates and what we expect of our students when they leave our system, how we're going to do it through our key priorities and levers. And those levers will be more about what you hear about in a few minutes. And then how do we do that? How do we measure that? We're measuring that through the goals that flow all the way down to our classroom. This is just one extra visual that we've been working on as a senior team and and even as a district leadership team, down to the principals as well. And really what I want you to take away from this document are a couple of things. One, if nothing else, our greatest hope for this year, and our, not just hope but plan, is that we can, over time, sooner than later, eliminate all the gaps that exist between our Black and our non-Black students, both from an academic standpoint, from a social emotional learning standpoint, on surveys, and in different assessment outcomes. And we want to have high quality instruction in every classroom, not by chance, but by design. That every teacher has the skills necessary, every principal is holding our teachers accountable to the expectations for what teachers should be doing in the classroom. And so while that may seem like, again, kind of an obvious goal that we would want high quality teaching in every classroom, we have to then change the actions of the folks in the system to make sure that happens. That's not going to happen by chance. It's going to happen through real intentionality and collective work. And so then you'll see those priorities down into the blue boxes, the next step down, that we alluded to in that last document around some of our key priorities and levers. We're talking about key priorities of culturally responsive, sustaining teacher and leader practice, a key priority of culturally affirming classroom and school environments. We know that professional development is critical to the success of any educational organization. And so a key supporting lever that you'll hear Dr. Lund talk more about is how we're going to implement leader and teacher professional learning systems. I say Dr. Lund, but in fact, actually Mr. Zaid and Mr. Samuels as well, because they're going to be talking about the work with principals as part of that professional development system. We're excited that we are embracing and launching our Center Black Student Excellence. And this is not, while it's sometimes on a visual like this, it looks like it's sort of separate. If we could create kind of a three-dimensional, more active visual right now, you would see the work of the Center Black Student Excellence really interwoven throughout these priorities. We're learning from the center. The center is going to help us to do better by all students, do better for our Black students. And so really that is kind of a spiral woven throughout. And all of that is grounded and anchored in transformative social and emotional learning. SEL is not something we do for 15 minutes in the morning and then we move on to our academics. It needs to be grounded. All of the work we do in our classrooms and with our students at our school needs to be grounded in that transformative social and emotional learning. So again, those blue bars, that is really the key aspects of our work with our teachers, with our principals, and service to our students. And then the bottom two, and we'll talk some about this, but this is really what will be coming up throughout the year. It is grounding our work in a system of accountability. So we're continually setting goals, monitoring our achievement of those goals, our approaching of those goals, making adjustments along the way, holding our folks in our system accountable, celebrating when we achieve it, and holding others accountable, providing additional coaching and support if they're not. And that's really what this visual then represents. So I want to pause for just a moment and talk about the idea of goal setting. I know oftentimes when we talk about goals, even our board goals, as you all have adopted them and are beginning to hold us accountable to that, we talk about student outcome goals. That's often what we're looking at. And of course, that's critical. We're a school system where we want to make sure our students are ready to move on and be successful in college and career. And so student outcomes, of course, are really important. And so we have our board goals that you all have set. We have district and superintendent's goals aligned to those board goals. And you'll hear a specific example from Mr. Zaid in a moment about then how those board and district goals flow all the way down to the classroom. But we can also look at it the other way. I say flow down. It could be the other way. Oftentimes, we're actually learning from our teachers, and we're seeing what they're able to achieve and what they're able to accomplish. We're learning new strategies that they're testing out, and that actually then can go the other direction. And we can then see that we're starting to build school-wide goals based on something that a teacher might have tested out at their school. And then other schools are learning about it. And so then you'll hear principals sharing ideas, and they'll actually then set some goals across schools because multiple teachers and multiple schools are testing it out. And then before you know it, we have an entire level. Maybe all of the elementary schools are going to use an application, use an approach because they've seen some success. And before you know it, we're talking about it in the boardroom. So this conversation about alignment from board to classroom can go the other direction, classroom to board. But without that strong alignment going back and forth, we're not going to achieve the outcomes we're looking for. So a lot of our work always has been, and in particular this year, you're going to hear a lot of real intentionality around that alignment up and down this flow chart, if you will. While we talk about student outcome goals, and again, that's critical and it's important, student outcome goals are not going to be achieved randomly. They're not going to be achieved by chance. They're going to be achieved because the adults in the system do something different. And so in that vein, we are actually this year, in addition to creating student outcome goals, we're setting adult outcome goals, adult action goals. And so whether that's you all setting goals for wanting to have student outcomes focused governance be more a part of your board meetings, you're looking at your own adult actions, your own data of how often you are centering student outcomes in board meetings and talking about how we might shift that. All the way throughout our system, we're talking about what do the adults need to do differently and how will we measure that? And again, you'll hear from our level leaders here in a moment about some ideas of what that could look like. So then coming back to this same document or the same visual that you heard Dr. Baker share just a moment ago, when we're thinking then about those goals, that's really in that so that component on that far right of the visual. The board goals, the district goals, the outcome goals, all the way through our organization. And generally for that, we're talking about our student outcome goals. So these are the things we want our students to be able to achieve. They're very often and almost always lagging indicators, meaning we won't know until the kids take that assessment or until the SBAC at the end of the year or until they get to 12th grade and we find out if they graduated. So often when we're setting these goals, they're lagging indicators, sometimes 2 to 3 months, sometimes 12 months, sometimes years, depending on what the measure is. And so that's important. We need to measure ourselves against those metrics, but there's more to it as well. So when we talk about the so that and the goals that we want to measure, then we start looking at the actual student metrics. And so I'm gonna pause here for a moment. These visuals that you see here are well known to all of you. We have our board goals on the top left. I put the website there for folks at home that may be watching that want to know how to access these. These are on our district website under the Board of Education page. From that then, we flowed into our district goals that are the superintendent's goals. This is also on our district webpage under superintendent's goals. Aligned, so on the left, on the bottom right-hand side of that document, the left are the board goals, the right are the district goals that are aligned to that, but go a little bit deeper by level and into some details. And by the way, board, you also have a handy, packet here that is paper clipped that has just a slightly bigger. We're gonna have you engage with this document here in a moment, and so we have it separate, so it's a little bit bigger for those of us who are maybe our eyes don't work as well as they used to. But really, the goal here that I'm going to pause and hand to Mr. Zaid is to what does it then look like to take board goals, flow them into district goals, and really flow them all the way down to the school and to the classroom. Mr. Zaid.
Mr. Zaid, before you, Brian,
Please.
Can I just interject? Could you go back? I think it's 3 slides. 1, 2 more, 1 more, right there.
Yep.
This is really helpful to me, at least, because oftentimes when I highlight or bring up or push our district around issues related to community engagement. Mm-hmm. It may seem like abstract or innocuous or ambiguous in terms of what is the correlation between community engagement, parent involvement, and these overarching objectives as they make their way down into a classroom. And so one of the things that I like about this visual is the understanding that in order to have culturally affirming, culturally sustaining, culturally responsive practices and settings, it comes with the not just acknowledgement, but critical understanding that our communities, our students, our caregivers, our parents have knowledge, bring assets to our district, have gifts and talents, right? And it's hard sometimes to, one may wonder, why does Juan keep pushing this parent involvement and community engagement? I'm not saying I'm the only one, but just kind of highlighting it here, because the concrete aspects of it is you cannot have culturally sustaining, culturally responsive, culturally affirming settings without a critical understanding that our communities are rich with knowledge and gifts and talents. And so even though here we're talking about it from a sort of district down to the classroom level, embedded in that is, practices, policies, guardrails, values that center that community is just as vital and pivotal to this. Because without that, then it doesn't matter what we do. Our adult behaviors, if we really want to uphold a community cultural wealth model, right, a liberatory educational model, whether it's pedagogically or in classroom environments, and just even the way we arrange the seating in our classrooms, that we can't do that without authentic, genuine parent involvement and community engagement. So I just wanted to highlight that, Brian, because weaved through this is the pillar of community engagement. And so I just want to be mindful and reaffirming that we have these values right around community engagement. They're in our Vision 2035. They're in our superintendent's guardrails, right? That these are not abstract things, right? That these are not innocuous things. That in order for us to achieve what's in these visuals, that's part of it, right? So thank you.
Yeah, no, that's really important. And first of all, I want to apologize to our translators. I think I was speaking a little quickly there. So I'm glad you took over for a moment to let them catch up. And I'll try to speak just a wee bit slower.
I think I made it harder for them with what I said right now. Brian.
So, I appreciate you actually bringing this back to the slide. Something that I've heard discussion about, which I think is really both poignant and true. We have culturally affirming classroom environments right now. They're not necessarily affirming individual students' cultures. They're affirming a very dominant culture. And so what you're talking about, what I hear you saying, and it's a good reminder to everyone listening and to us, frankly, is that what we're actually talking about is understanding the richness that comes from the cultures that exist in our community and ensuring that those cultures are brought into our classrooms and those cultures are affirmed, not just one dominant culture being affirmed.
That's beautifully stated, Brian, and I would take it even a step further. There are concrete ways of knowing, ways of learning.
Absolutely.
We talk about multilingualism and emerging bilingualism. Language is a cultural gift and asset, right? So this deficit mindset that is only based on, and again, we're not perpetuating this, but there is this discourse and narrative that you must learn English in this country, but it doesn't have to come at the cost of giving up indigenous languages, right? We talk about again, and I'm speaking to our community members here, the value of Khmer, right? Not just from a cultural tradition, right? Not just from a historical context, right? That it weaves and embeds everything we do, not just as an acknowledgement, but as a critical pillar to this work, right? So absolutely, Brian, yes, that. So the environment, again, the context here is undoing harm that our system had this very top-down, deficit-based approach that our communities and students are not empty vessels. They're coming in with knowledge. Again, so I'm highlighting things that you all present to us, whether it's project-based learning, whether it's small learning communities. These are all based on the value that our students do have knowledge and talents and gifts, all right? And the communities that they're coming to us from are part of this partnership.
And again, just to then reiterate, we have teachers right now that are doing just that daily. They understand the need and value, and they have the skills. And so we're learning from those teachers who are doing it. We're making sure then we expand that professional learning so that all teachers, not a student doesn't receive that teacher by chance, but that a student receives a teacher that has those skills by design, through training, through supportive principles. And that is exactly what then we're trying to build throughout our system. Yeah, that's great. I appreciate you bringing us back to that document. And we'll, after I hand it off to David here in a moment, we'll come back and then talk a little bit more about what that may look like in our system.
Can I make a real small point in conjunction with what Juan's talking about? I thought the meeting last Saturday morning was so powerful when we recognized and celebrated our Hispanic students, really for the first time in that way, that recognition comes across and enables all of that. And we have been focused on black students for very good reasons, and it's been very powerful and moving to see what's happened. But as we also single out other groups and their backgrounds and what they bring, it's part of the community that we are. So that's what I heard Juan saying. is that you got to recognize that.
So I just want to thank you again for lifting up the asset-based pedagogies that come in the form of what it means to be culturally relevant and responsive and sustaining, because you are right, the Latino Heritage Celebration this past Saturday had the rich assets on full display of what our students are able to come to us with, including their linguistic assets. So one of the themes that Brian lifted up was coherence, strategic, and alignment. And if you'll take a look at the paper-clipped documents that are in front of you, that look like this. One says our Board of Education goals. The other says our district and superintendent goals. And I'll ask you to take the district and superintendent goals, which also has the board goals right on the side. And if you'll just lay them down right next to the principal goal and alignment support tool. This was a support tool that was used with our elementary and K-8 principals. And just want to give you an opportunity to look at the coherence and alignment and to look through each column. You'll see under the column that says alignment on the actual support tool, you should see our board goals right next to our district and superintendent's goals, right next to our level office. Then it moves to an actual site and what might show up in a single plan for student achievement. There's an acronym on the top. Then how does that then move to a grade level goal? And then how do we move from a grade level goal to an individual teacher's goal? So I'm just going to give you just a few minutes to take a look at that and just see if there's anything that you notice where you might find a common thread, where you might find something new at each level. I just want to give you an opportunity to lift up any noticings.
Well, I'm noticing that the goals for achieving 1 year of 1 year of academic growth in literacy is the same in each column, whether it's a district goal, a school goal, or a classroom goal. So there's that alignment. So I'm noticing that.
Right. What's really nice about that particular noticing is you'll notice that in the board goal, it shares that the percentage of grade 3 students who meet or exceed, specifically in English language arts on the SBAC, will grow from 48% in June of 2023 to 70% to June of 2028. And so while we're expecting each individual student to make that growth, you'll see how that growth is spelled out in the level, moving from 49% to 54%. Then that expectation in June of 2026 to move from 60% to June of 2027, which would be 65%. Then June of 2028, which would be 70%, which would be right in alignment with where we are moving with our board goal. You also may notice that iReady is mentioned you'll see that they're numbered 1, 2, and 3. But then when you get to iReady, you'll see an ES next to that, just standing for elementary schools. But adding in an additional measure that we take a look at to look at how students are making progress towards that SBAC. And this is data that is being lifted up with the board for us to measure. So just giving you an opportunity to see the arrangement from grades 3 through 5 to grades K through 2 to grades K through 5, each one in alignment, moving as Brian lifted up, from our board goals to our district goals to our level goals, to our sites, to our grade levels, and to our classrooms. And when we have an opportunity to share a bit more, we'll just share how we're not only in alignment with the goals, but those opportunities to continue to learn in both directions.
David, can you take just a moment? Our research department, which does great work, our research and student outcomes team, Dr. Madrigal and her team, can you just speak, David, to how they helped principals recently think about then, depending on where a school is at right now, because if we have a goal of 5% growth, not every school is going to choose 5%.
Right.
Some are further behind, some are further ahead. Can you just kind of
Absolutely.
talk through what that process was like to help schools determine their appropriate goal?
Well, this would be a wonderful opportunity to highlight not only the wonderful work of the research office and their presentations to you, but the direct support that they provide to our level offices. And the way that this was arranged, each school had an opportunity to reflect on where they are. And so our research department came to our principals meeting and created a link for each one of our principals to be able to go in and see where their school was, and to not just look at where their school was, but to also look at trends. So where was I this year? Where was I last year? Where was I the year before that? What growth are we making? And then how do we make sure that we're also aligning with these goals? And so we did have some sites that were well above these goals. We had some sites that were below. Some sites chose 5%. Other sites, knowing that they needed to accelerate, chose a larger percent, said, hey, we're going to stretch ourselves towards 8% of growth, 9% of growth. So it looked a little different for each site, but each site was supported with where they were, and then spent time looking at how they were going to move students along.
Oh, one quick, so it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
It is not a one-size-fits-all, but it is an asset-based approach where we're looking at the assets of each of our individual schools and moving them along.
Dr. Benitez?
And I don't want to jump ahead here, but Brian, and I just saw Dr. Madrigal step in. So the conversations that we've been having in our superintendent advisory groups around sort of what additional things do we want to highlight along the way. Given that it's not a one-size-fits-all, I think it's also important to have an understanding of how do we account for, speaking to my teacher friends that I've been meeting with, and that's one of the reasons I was a little late this morning. I was at the Franklin school community. Teachers feeling the stress, perhaps, of having a classroom with students that are 2 or more grade levels behind, and feeling like, how do I get this group, right? If data is leading these conversations, whether it's by percent growth, improvement, learning, given that there may be contextual school site specific considerations that would present more challenging environments for a teacher in certain schools at certain grade levels in certain parts of our district versus other schools in other parts of our district. Again, the context here of the communities that we're working in. Not to answer right now, but I think those would be key things to highlight. If it's not a one-size-fits-all, what kinds of supports, what kinds of additional things are we providing teachers, given that not all classes look and or sound and feel the same, right?
I think that's exactly right. And there's probably multiple hours that we could spend talking about this, but I will say just slightly in response. We have schools, I'm going to say like a Stevens Middle School, that over multiple years now has made tremendous growth. And there may be people in our district who would say, but Stevens is a school that has challenges. Stevens has students that come maybe further behind. Maybe they started multiple years behind. They've made now 2 years of double-digit growth. We're identified as a California Distinguished School. And I believe, and I think we believe, that every school has that ability to do so with the right amount of support, with the right amount of intentionality, the right amount of professional learning, aligned to what principals expect to see in the classroom and the work the principal's doing in the classroom. It's not easy work by any means, but we know where there are highlights, and we're trying to, again, make it not by chance, but that's by design, that every school uplifts those. So yeah, I do appreciate that, and we recognize that if you have students in your classroom that are a couple of years behind on iReady, that there are different kinds of strategies you're going to need to implement than if you had all students on grade level. And so we then tailor our support in that way as well.
Just to add to that too, Dr. Benitez, I think it's a really important aspect of our work to hold when we talk about student outcomes, that there are adults trying their best out across our system. And so it is incumbent on us to think about what different supports, what different kinds of training, what different kinds of systems do they need to feel like they are able to make a difference, the best difference they can make, even in a differentiated environment where we know why we monitor growth at the school level is because we also have different students in different places, and growth really matters. There is we are measured by summative assessments, and we know that growth really matters.
Okay, so we're going to get right back to David and Ed and Chris here in a moment. But before, I just wanted to point out a couple quick things, somewhat reminders and maybe new for folks at home. Dr. Benitez, at the last board meeting, you asked the question, how do we, you as the board and we collectively, how do we know if we're making progress towards our board goals? And so I just wanted to remind everyone in this room and those at home, you all and we, with the support of our, with Dr. Madrigal and her team, we established interim board goals. So if by 2028 was the board goal, each year we have interim goals towards that. And so you see this slide up here. These are the interim goals for each of the board goals. Each one aligns to one of the board goals. For example, I'll just point out that first one. Goal 1, it says 85% of kindergarten students will score met or exceeded on the foundational reading skills assessment. You'll recall the reason we chose kindergarten is because that is the cohort that will be the third grade students in 2028. So we're looking at that cohort. I also want to point that one out because I think it's an important distinction. I put the asterisk next to that 85%. The original interim goal that we had established for this year for kindergarten FIRSA was 75%. We were already at 75% this last year in kindergarten. So to maintain that same goal when we had already achieved it isn't going to make sense. So we need to elevate our expectations if we've already achieved it. So we actually increased that to 85% for this year's kindergartners. And so that's just an example of, while we have interim goals, that's going to help us know if we're making progress. If we're moving faster than we thought and we're accelerating our growth, we're going to raise those interim goals. And on the other hand, if we're not quite where we need to be, we're not going to lower the interim goals. That means we just need to do better and to accelerate the following year even more to get to that point. So I think it's important. We'll keep coming back to these interim goals, and when Dr. Madrigal and her team are with us to kind of look at our progress, we'll make sure that we keep uplifting the interim goals as well to help us keep track of if we're making progress or not. So just a couple more quick slides before we hand off. So if up to this point, these last few slides, we're really talking about student outcomes. That's the What we're going to talk about really for the rest of this presentation are the adult actions. What are we doing differently? And in some cases, continuing because we've seen early success with them. What are we going to do as adults in our system to ensure that we are more likely to achieve those outcomes? So something you all have maybe heard about is what we call a PDSA cycle, a plan, do, study, act. This is very common in a lot of organizations, definitely in education. This idea of you plan for something, you do it, usually on a small scale, kind of at first. You study those results, you look at data, you look at outcomes, you observe, and then based on that, you act. And act might be changing your approach, it might be expanding that thing that seems to be working. So we talk a lot about PDSA, and I'll just give you one very quick example that should be familiar to you all because of some of the presentation you heard last year. So in our system, we have embarked now for a couple of years on this idea of an early literacy initiative. We want to make sure that our third grade students by 2028 are reading proficiently. In order to do that, we need to make sure that all of our teachers in grades TK through 2-3 are really strongly grounded in the practices needed for early literacy. So we're planning for that. We know kind of what we do. We're looking at the research. We're learning from experts around the country. We're learning from our own teachers that are showing success. And we're planning for what that would look like. Last year, we tested out, under the do column, we tested out Great First Aid over at Grant Elementary. And you actually heard a teacher from Grant last year came and shared a little bit about what she and her colleagues were testing out. And from that, we actually studied then. We were studying what they were doing at Grant, and we were kind of learning what was working, how might we bring that into some of the professional development for all teachers in Long Beach Unified, what else might we do? And then this year, based on that, we're acting by slightly expanding the reach. So now Great First Aid is in kinder and first at Grant, and we're also testing it out at 5 pre-K TK sites to see if this is something that could also support our work in lower grades. So this is the idea. We plan for something, we do it, we test it out, we study to see how it's working, and then we act. And that, again, that act can look differently. So here are some examples then of, well, if we're gonna study something, or we're gonna plan for something, or we're gonna act on something, where does that happen? I think sometimes folks might just think that, 8 of us are sitting around a table like dreaming up all the things that we're gonna do in our district. That is far from the truth. We have lots of folks throughout our system that are deeply engaged in these conversations about if we're getting successful outcomes, how do we build on that? If we're not meeting our goals, what are we gonna do differently? And so these are just a few of the examples of committees and groups and places where we're engaging in these PDSA cycles regularly. So over on the left, you have groups like our strategic planning, our strategic planning group comes together monthly, our senior team meetings. We have a committee called the TK12 collaboration meeting. That includes most of the curriculum leaders, OCIPD staff, level offices, principal supervisors, senior team, folks from OSSS, HRS, TISB, research. It is a broad group of about 50 individuals that come together just talking about what instructional practice needs to look like, what instructional support needs to look like in our system based on data. In the middle there, you've got groups like, that's a little even small for my eyes. Let me go to my larger screen here. Thank you. We've got our academic alignment and principal supervisor initiative. So David, Ed, and I are regularly talking with principal supervisors. How do we make sure there's alignment? Whether you're an elementary supervisor or a secondary supervisor, what does good instruction look like in our system? Chris and his team are regularly coming together to talk about that. We have collaboration across OSSS will meet with the levels, OCIPD will meet with the levels, research will meet with the levels. So constantly coming together, looking at data. And when I say looking at data, all of these groups are grounded in a form of multiple forms of data. That data can look like observations in classrooms. We're out in schools. We're talking to teachers. We're surveying teachers. Teachers are part of things like teacher council. Department heads are coming in to let us know what's really happening out in our schools. So lots of student data, lots of adult input data, lots of observational data, that quantitative and qualitative that you often hear Dr. Madrigal sharing with us. So I just bring this up again. Maybe folks in this room have heard of these, maybe folks at home haven't. But just pointing out, there are a lot of different groups involved in these PDSA cycles to help us to determine what are we seeing out in classrooms and how might we make some decisions about what we want to do moving forward. So in a nutshell, that's kind of the role of Chief Academic Office, bringing these three together. And what we're going to get to do now is we're going to get to hear then, what do those adult actions look like this year in our level offices and in our curriculum office in support of these goals that we've outlined. So first up will be Mr. Zaid, related to our elementary and TK8 schools.
I'm just going to interject real quick before you pass it over. I'm noticing that with this presentation, there's kind of an emphasis on our communities. I've heard you say repeatedly about, for those at home, or maybe the community, and I'm thinking, that's a good shift in itself. Just thinking of these presentations, not how it relates to the board exclusively in this setting, but also that it would be accessible for our community members, maybe watching at home, maybe they'll be watching later. And I also noticed on this goals and alignment support tool, the acronyms, a lot of the acronyms were explained, which makes it more user-friendly, which makes it more accessible for our families and communities. So I want to thank you for doing that.
Thank you, President Cricket. Interesting. I will say, I think I'm surprised, and maybe I should no longer be surprised by the number of teachers and staff who watch our board meetings later. Board workshop, they're probably not watching right now. They're probably in their classroom teaching, but they'll watch it later. And even some of this work around, like, how do PDSAs happen? What are some of the different groups that come together? There are probably teachers that aren't even necessarily aware. So yes, I appreciate that. In addition to making sure we're informing the 5 of you, the 6 of you, I think there is also, it's really important to make sure that whoever may be watching at home is also having an opportunity for their own education.
Thank you. I appreciate that framing and that thought to our audience who is listening and maybe asking, what are leaders up to in Long Beach Unified? What are our principals up to? For our new student board member who says, hey, I'm with my teacher all the time, but what is my principal up to? We're going to spend just a little bit of time talking about what our leaders are up to and what this looks like at the elementary and TK8 school level. I just want to lift up a few words that you heard. So you heard coherence, you heard strategic, you heard alignment, you heard Brian say not by chance, but by design. And so we want to just spend a little bit of time just in the first slide lifting up the critical role of school leaders. As Brian began, he referenced a 2004 report that has shared for the last 20 years that our school leaders are the second greatest impact on student achievement. And the word there says principals are learning and leading. But you could literally take that word out, principals, and put all leaders are learning and leading here in our district. This has been a year of learning, and specifically through a time of exponential change in the world and infinite possibilities in LBUSD. Student outcomes won't change until adult behaviors and inputs change. I think we've heard that stated before that ideal results do require ideal behaviors. And principals are the multipliers of effective teaching and the difference between individual teacher success and system level success. The expectations that principals set and the systems of accountability that they stand for speak for our collective belief about students. As we transition, we will also begin with our why, of course, being our graduate portrait, and then move into the key levers for our principals. And I just want to share that this is for the elementary and K-8 as well as the secondary schools levels. So those key levers, as you can see outlined there, are supervision and feedback, which includes classroom observations aligned with the feedback, site PD plans, professional development plans, so making sure that our quality core instruction and what is being outlined, that each site has an individual professional development plan to support the teachers at that site. Also, site teams, thinking of our facilitators, thinking of our what we refer to as our IICs, but our intervention and instructional coordinators who are working hand in hand with the principals, making sure that site teams are working together, and then looking at data and progress monitoring. So those are the 4 key levers, not only at the elementary and K-8 division or level, but also at the secondary level. And then, of course, our what being to obtain the district goals that we just saw, the alignment and coherence within. As we move to the key focus at the elementary and TK8 level, the first thing that you'll see is the culturally responsive principal actions. And when we refer to the culturally responsive principal actions, which we speak for not only elementary and TK8, but also secondary, we're speaking of specifically what it means to be culturally responsive. How does that play out in the supervision of instruction? And then also that key component of progress monitoring. You'll see that supervision and feedback of classroom instruction, specifically with the focus on our K through 2 literacy and our 3 through 5 math. You'll hear a little bit more about the individuality of the professional development and what we're looking for when Dr. Lund presents. But this year, in the spirit of leading and learning, we are collectively using a calibration and coherence tool to inform our next steps. And what this is it is a tool that all principals are using in the classroom that allows them to look at the equitable and inclusive classroom environment, that actually allows them to look at the relevance and responsiveness within a lesson, to look at the rigor and to make sure that we're meeting the rigor of the standard, to look at not just active participation, but cognitive engagement. Are students having the opportunity to exchange ideas and exchange their thinking in the classroom? To look at scaffolds and students who are not quite there at grade level, but how we might be meeting their needs, and also formative assessments to assess right there in the moment, did the student meet the learning intention? Did they meet what was outlined in that lesson, and how can we engage in feedback loops with our students to make sure that we can give them real-time feedback? So this calibration and coherence tool is shared between the principal and the principal supervisor. And what it allows principals to do in each classroom, it allows them to not only share feedback, but to get a sense for where our individual classrooms are with these lessons. This calibration and coherence tool not only allows us to calibrate between principals and between principal supervisors, but it also gives us feedback as to how we might be able to meet the needs of our principals in our principals meetings, and it informs our professional development, as well as you heard about the opportunities for us to come together and speak to coherence, how this can also inform our curriculum office in the way that we are also supporting teachers. Then there's also our professional development plans, and each site has an individual plan aligned to the QCI focus. Some of our sites are honing in on rigor. Some of our sites are really strengthening their learning intentions and success criteria. Other sites are really focusing on the cognitive engagement and really spending time doing a deeper dive into making sure that each classroom is being given rigorous questions so that students can exchange their thinking. And this is the way that our levers are playing out, and this is how we're focusing. I'll just move right to our next slide so you can see how this is broken down just a little bit further. At our K through 2 level, during the school day, you can see our instruction and intervention coordinators that we often refer to as our IICs or our reading leads are in classrooms on a daily basis, modeling, co-planning, with teachers. They are in those classrooms giving feedback. They, at the 3 through 5 level, as we think about our 5E lessons, we also have our IICs, or our instruction and intervention coordinators, and math leads in those lessons. Now, one of the questions that Dr. Benitez, you asked is, you said, give me some specific examples of how this might be different, because I do want to share that our instruction and intervention coordinators are mainly focused on what we would call our Tier 1 instruction, or the instruction for the entire class. But they also do support at the Tier 2 level, meaning that they are able to go in also during a teacher's workshop time and model pulling a small group, work with teachers on the design of those small groups and meeting those individual needs. And I know, because you brought up even what do we do about those students who may be even 2 grade levels behind, we do have specific ways that we meet their needs. And so our RSP teachers also have a program called Sunday. And that particular program was designed specifically a targeted support for students who are 2 or more years behind in reading and haven't shown progress with other types of interventions. So there are some very specific targeted ways that we're meeting those needs. And our IICs, while they're primarily supporting Tier 1 instruction, they have supported with Tier 2, with small groups, so that we can meet the individual needs of students. With that, we will also talk about...
Hey, David, I'm sorry
Sure.
to interrupt you here.
Sure.
But I also had questions about that piece. So I know you probably have heard me say this statement a million times, but I'll ask again. The term, what does success look like? So how do they actually, I guess, quantify success from the I'm sorry, I don't want to mess up the term here. Give me 1 second. With the site teams, so how do they quantify what success looks like from that component?
So at the beginning of the year, you'll see all of our schools are engaged in assessing the needs of our students, whether they're new to our district or whether they are students that we already have. And as you've seen with the coherence and alignment of our goals, our district goals and our board goals, the expectation is every student is making 1 year of academic success. So when we find that we have students who have not met that academic success, when we are looking at their assessment data, whether that's 3 through 5 and we're looking at our state testing, or whether we're looking at our iReady assessments, or whether we're talking about K through 2 and we're looking at those essential foundational reading skills, we're looking at, are they making adequate progress? And when they're not making adequate progress, how might we meet their needs through instruction as well as through meeting their needs in small groups?
So on one of my site visits about a year ago, I was down at Lafayette, and so they had a classroom set aside where they literally had a breakdown of everybody's iReady scores, and they were looking at each student individually on where they were scoring and working with the IICs to help support each student. And so I was just so impressed with that level of analytics. I mean,
Absolutely.
Obviously, we're a group that looks at things from a 50,000-foot level, but to see it all the way down to this individual student in this individual class and how much time we're spending, so on and so forth, that's why my curiosity is around what those goals really look like from a metric standpoint. And I'm glad to hear that this is something that's happening district-wide.
So thank you for lifting up Lafayette, because that's a key example of something that you were able to visually see in that classroom. And I'll say, while it looks different at each school, at Lafayette, you may have saw it in an actual room. But if you had traveled over to Signal Hill, you would have saw it on individual folders that teachers use to look at individual students and to look at how they're moving and making adequate progress. If you had traveled over to Edison, where there were some downtown visits, you would have seen individual one-on-one, which is what most of our principals do. They meet with teachers individually. So they release teachers to meet with them, and they drill all the way down to individual students. Where are they? and what goals do we have for this year, and how specifically are we going to meet those needs. So I appreciate that. If we had more time, I would go through all 53 schools, but there are some great things happening at our individual schools, and I'll just say this is an example of leaders who can make a difference for our students. I think it's my turn to pass if there are no more questions.
Good morning. Well, at the secondary level, when it comes to the key levers that we're focusing on, our key levers are exactly the same as elementary and the TK8 office. And so as you saw before, we're focusing on those same 4 levers with our secondary principals. In every meeting, we're uplifting those areas, and we're helping our principals develop a deeper understanding of each lever. When we come to our focus areas, we have a similar foci as elementary and TK8, but some other areas of focus as well that I would like to uplift. Number 1, we're focusing on the implementation of our equitable grading policy. And it's really important to understand that this policy is designed to ensure consistent grading practices across our system. We want to make sure that kids have a similar experience regardless of which school or which teacher. And all of our departments within our district, and most likely our course-alike courses at each site, they have agreed on the same grading scale. They've agreed on how they're going to implement the policy, and we've ensured that each school is guaranteeing that students will have an opportunity to turn in missed work within the first 2 weeks without penalty. They have opportunities to retake tests or revise, make test revisions if needed. So that's offered to students as well. And throughout the year, we're going to have opportunities to speak directly with teachers to get feedback so that we can learn from them about what's working, what's not working, what adjustments will be need to be made next year. And so that's one area that we're focusing on this year in particular, and we're looking forward to some opportunities to learn from our teachers in the coming weeks. Another area of focus
Mr. Samuels,
for
I just
yes,
want
sir.
to give the teachers props when we're talking about adult behaviors changing. Every
Yes.
classroom that I saw at Franklin today had the clear grading policy for that specific class. I have a picture that I took because every classroom that I went into, there was this big, visible, here's my grading policy that reflects and upholds our equitable grading policy.
Oh, that's
here.
great.
So again, if we talk about, what is it, plan, do, study, act, the act part, as we're still studying,
Yes.
right, is there before our eyes. So again, just an illustrative example of what you just covered there with the first.
Thank you. Yeah, and I do concur. We do have to give our teachers a lot of credit for taking on this change. It takes a lot of courage, and we really appreciate their efforts. And they're sharing with us some possible adjustments for next year, and so we really appreciate that as well. Another area of focus for us is we're focusing on how to provide support for students as they transition from middle school to high school, from elementary to middle school. And at the high school level, our schools are participating in the Breakthrough Success Community, which is led by CORE, and we're all familiar with the CORE districts. And the Breakthrough Success Community is designed to transform the ninth grade experience for our students as they transition. Research out of the University of Chicago has shown that students' academic performance in the ninth grade is the most predictive factor in whether they persist to graduation. And so it's very important for us to provide these supports. It's very important for us to ensure that students have a successful ninth grade year. And so we have our schools participating in the Breakthrough Success Community so that we can make sure that our kids have a successful transition. One thing about the Breakthrough Success Community is that it has 5 drivers. And what I love is that these 5 drivers are perfectly aligned to the work that we're doing as a district. One of the drivers is adult collaboration. And every site, we have our adults collaborating, whether it's grade level collaboration, whether it's pathways, whether it's departments. We have teachers collaborating on a regular basis. Another driver is supportive transition, which the 8th to 9th grade transition, which is one area that they're focusing on. Developmental relationships. And we talk about how important and valuable it is for teachers to develop relations with their students, to get to know them on a personal level. So then now that student is not a number, but that student is actually a person before them. They also focus on student-centered scheduling, which if you think about the work that we do with our master schedules, that's a very key component within our Breakthrough Success community. And also equitable grading, which, as you know, that's something that we're focusing on. And so our teams are participating regularly with CORE. They're meeting regularly, and they're taking a deeper dive in these drivers. And the data has clearly shown that the work thus far has really helped our 9th grade students. And so that's some work we're continuing. And we know that transitioning from 8th to 9th is a challenge for students. And so we also know that transitioning from 5th to 6th is a challenge for students. And so with both of those transitions, we actually have structures in place to provide students that first positive interaction when they step on campus. At the middle school level, we call it WEB, which means where everybody belongs. And so when a 6th grader gets an opportunity to visit their campus for the first time in August, they are welcomed by 8th graders who've been trained to lead team building activities, to do some really engaging work with these incoming 6th graders. And when they get on that campus, the first thing they see is maybe 50 to 100 8th graders cheering them on, celebrating them as they walk onto the campus. And it's just a really wonderful experience for them. And you see kids transform throughout the day. They come in nervous, they come in shy, but when they leave, they're transformed. I've seen it personally where you just see the excitement. Some kids don't even want to leave because they've had such a wonderful time with their 8th grade mentors. And so Web has really helped many of our kids transition, give them that first positive introduction to their school. And at the high school level, we have a similar process or similar group called Link Crew, and they do the same thing for our 9th graders, our freshmen as they come on campus.
Mr. Samuels, just to add to what you've shared, both of those elements that Ed is sharing started smaller than they are now, either started by individual schools or a group of schools. In the case of CORE, there were 5 high schools at a small scale, and so watching the results and the impact was then something that we determined to bring to all high schools and over a multi-year plan, because as was shared, there are several strategies embedded into the work of core districts in this Breakthrough Success community, all research-based, but all requiring a different way to think about, especially the 9th grade year. And also with Web and Link Crew, those were individual schools that brought those strategies in for the transitions. And as we've watched the impact and seen data change, sense of belonging change, they have been brought to system level. I say that also because it's good for you to know when you think about the approval of a budget and our LCAP, those are embedded into district funding and no longer left up to chance for a school to think it's a good idea. But the budget that you all approve allows us to have those at a system level, which is different than having a school take its own money and invest in something that they've heard is a good idea.
Thank you. An additional area of focus includes our systems of accountability. Each December, our principals are provided staffing allocations, and they're required to take those allocations and utilize those allocations in the development of equitable master schedules. And they have to ensure that they're meeting the needs of the students on their campus. And so our sites have all been trained on how to develop equitable master schedules, and we have moved as a system to more student-driven and student-centered master schedules. And so in our high schools, you will see that each pathway has developed a course sequence that's been, first of all, it's been audited by our Pathways office, and every course sequence includes courses that will ensure that students are A through G ready. No, regardless of what the pathway is, regardless of what school site, every Pathways course sequence has the 15 A through G courses for our students. And so it's our goal for every student when they leave our district to leave Long Beach Unified School District college and career ready. And so all of our schools are creating those master schedules that ensure that happens, and they're utilizing their resources to make sure that all the student needs are met at their site. But in order for that to occur, we do have some academic supports that we have to have in place, because there are some areas where students may need additional support. And you heard David talk about our instruction and intervention coordinators. In the middle school, we do have those as well. And just like David said, they provide additional support to teachers, whether they're leading professional learning, whether they're coaching teachers, whether they're modeling lessons, or leading professional development. They play a pivotal role in helping teachers improve their practice. When students need additional literacy support, we do have some supports for them as well. We have an intervention class during the school day that is called College and Career Readiness. It's known as CCR. That class provides targeted literacy support for students to help strengthen their literacy skills. And so whether it's reading comprehension or writing or what have you, the teachers spend extra time with students to really support them in that area. For our newcomers who actually come to our schools, we have a program called Enlace. And Enlace is a self-contained environment for students as they acquire the language. And they get that support from one single teacher, but they also get to move into maybe some PE classes, and they start to transition into our system. And for that first year in the country, they have opportunity to be in an Enlace program. As students move to their second year in the country, maybe second to fourth year, we do enroll them in what's called a CCR ELD class. That's where they get their designated ELD support at the middle school level. And so kids are constantly provided support in those areas so that they can continue to acquire the language, but also maintain their native language, and of course grow as learners in our system. In math, we provide a few areas of support as well. Students do have an opportunity to be enrolled in a math development course if they are falling a little bit behind, and that course provides targeted math support for students. Students do have an opportunity, and many students utilize the Khan Academy platform. And if you're not familiar with Khan Academy, it's an online platform that has instructional videos. It provides additional practice. It gives a personalized learning dashboard for students who can study at their own pace. And some classes built that in to their math development courses, but students also have access to it at home as well. And every student has access to what's called tutor.com. And tutor.com is a web-based service that the district provides where students have access to live tutors any time of the day, any day of the week. And so we do have those supports as well for students. And then when you look at our schools and their single plan for student achievement, whether they're Title I schools or non-Title I schools, each school is required to work with their school site council to look at data at their site, analyze that data, determine the needs of their students, and then identify any additional resources that are needed to meet the needs of their students. And so when we look at their single plans for student achievement, we see that some schools will pay for tutoring services. And maybe there's some after-school tutoring, some before-school tutoring that they have chosen to provide to their students because they see that that's a need. And that's just one example of something that they may choose to fund out of their single plan for student achievement. When we look at our high schools, the supports are similar. There's just one difference at the high school level is that there's something called Apex. And Apex is an online platform, and we use Apex to assist kids who need help recovering credits. So when kids, need to recover some credits, They have an opportunity to take a course, which is an online course. It's an A through G course, and they're able to recover those credits. And the counselors do an excellent job of building that into the student's schedule. And it's a course that they're able to complete at their own pace. And many students, because it's a credit recovery course, it gives them a pretest, and then when they take the pretest, there are certain units that are omitted because they've already demonstrated mastery, and then they have to just complete the areas that they have not yet demonstrated mastery. And so we have some kids who move through that rather quickly, they recover their credits, and then they're back on track for graduating. Now, as a system, when we talk about how we monitor data and progress monitoring, when we look at that fourth lever for our principals, we have a system that we've implemented, and our principals are very familiar with this PDSA cycle. And throughout this PDSA cycle, even though it looks like one cycle, there are multiple cycles embedded within it. And so it starts off in August. And every August, our schools gather together to review data. We call that the collaborative data study. And our principals and their teacher teams will review the data at their site, and then we pretty much review the previous year's student achievement data, the core survey data, the pulse survey data. And it gives them an opportunity to begin the development of their goals, begin to talk about where they want to go for the year, and it leads into the goal setting phase where some schools will, have most of it done in August, and some will work through September to complete those goals. Then as we move throughout the months of October and November, each school conducts what's called an internal learning walk. And this is an opportunity for the admin and the teacher leaders to take a look into classrooms and to see how are things going. Do we see implementation of quality core instruction? And it's an internal learning walk because there are no visitors except for maybe the principal supervisor. So it's not one of those events where it's a show for the outsiders. It's a true opportunity for them to gather qualitative data on their progress towards the attainment of their goals. And so principals and teams walk through their classrooms. They gather that data. They sit down at the end of the day and they begin to talk about, do we need to make adjustments? How are we doing so far? Let's go back to our PD plans. Let's see if there's any tweaks we need to make, et cetera. At the end of the first semester, they have another opportunity to do a collaborative data study. Now we have semester grades in, and once all that data is in our system, our teams, they conduct a collaborative data study to study the data from semester one. And now they're looking at the quantitative data for the current year. And so they have an opportunity to, again, reflect upon that data, ask themselves the same questions, and to now look back and say, what changes do we need to make? When that collaborative data study has concluded, that's the time when the principal supervisor gets to sit down with the principal one-on-one, and we have what's called a mid-year conference. And principal supervisors and principals go through that same data, and we begin to start to have principals reflect upon that qualitative and quantitative data to discuss, whether or not some changes need to be made. We also take a moment to celebrate where there's opportunities for celebration. And we also acknowledge, what lies ahead for the second semester. And then we have what's really exciting in March is what's called our quality core visit. And the quality core visit does include visitors. So with our quality core visit, we actually invite members from all departments in our district, whether it's OCIPD, whether it's OSSS, research. We've had members from facilities and maintenance, budget, all visit our school sites last year. And this provides two key benefits. Number one, it gives our schools an opportunity to have critical friends from the outside to really take a look to see if the school is reaching its goals, and gives that critical feedback, that warm and cool feedback that our principals appreciate, so that we can share from an outsider's point of view what we're seeing. but also it provides our visitors an opportunity to see how their work impacts the school site. So we're trying to actualize our adult portrait to help all of our adults understand that we all have a role in creating a better future together for our students. Regardless of what role you play, your job has an impact on our students. And so we found last year that that was very beneficial for many folks in our system. They really appreciated that opportunity to be able to take a peek inside of a classroom and see how their work has materialized. And so with our quality core visit, once again, our principals take that data, take it back to their teams, and again, it's another opportunity to reflect and to revise. And at that moment, principals begin to look at what they're going to do for the last quarter, any adjustments for the last quarter, but they also begin to look to next year. And they began to start thinking about what changes do we need to make for the following year. And then we close the year out with principal supervisors and principals in the end of year conference to have that conversation about how did your year go, what changes do we need to make for next year, and then of course again we celebrate or we push in areas that need to be changed for the following year. And all throughout the year we are reviewing and analyzing quantitative and qualitative data, and one key aspect of our work that's not depicted there is the support that we get from our curriculum office. And so I'm gonna pass it on to
You are in just a moment, yeah. Thank you very much, both David and Ed. If I can just pause on this slide for a moment. So we were talking earlier today about both student outcome data and adult input data and adult actions. And so actually this PDSA cycle you see here is a great example of both happening simultaneously, interwoven throughout. So we're setting student outcome goals, we're monitoring those throughout the year, but we're also setting adult action goals and monitoring those throughout the year. So the internal learning walks, the quality core visits, the mid-year conferences, the one-on-ones that you heard David talking about between a principal and a teacher, the one-on-ones between a principal and a principal supervisor, those are all in service to adult actions and monitoring those adult actions. So again, I talked about the PDSA concept. This is what it looks like in implementation for both those student and adult actions. I do want to pause though before we move on to OCIPD and Dr. Lund sharing their work also around adult actions. Any questions you might have for David or Ed?
I do. I do have a question. So first of all, Mr. Samuels, thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate the work that you're doing in ensuring that all of our students, regardless of pathway, have access to those A through G courses. And my question is, can our EL students take an AP course in lieu of that CCR ELD class? So in other words, if a student feels that they're ready for that AP course, can they take that course instead, like an AP course instead of the CCR ELD? And I'm asking this question because recently a student enrolled in an AP course at a high school and was taken out of that course and instead enrolled in the CCR ELD. So I guess that is my question.
Yes, so we would definitely work with the counselors in a situation like that, but they definitely can take an AP course. But we also try to provide that additional support, and so we want to make sure that they get the support that they need so that they can have both if possible. And what's great about because that's a high school example, what's great about our high school is that they have an 8 periods that we can utilize, and we don't utilize all 8 periods. And so we can actually place one of those courses in one of those additional periods.
Sure, because I do believe that we need to provide these ELD courses as well, right? But if a student feels and wants to take an AP course, I think we ought to provide them those opportunities. And I agree, maybe enrolling in the two, but I don't think we should exclude our students from those AP courses. Thank you.
Ms. Lopez, it makes me think about just the importance of the communication between a parent, counselor, administrators, the school broadly. We've had situations, for example, where a parent will say, I don't necessarily want my child to be in an A through G course for a variety of reasons. And we want to make sure we talk to that parent and help them to understand the ramifications of that. And in many cases, the parent then, of course, will then re-enroll their child back into that A through G course. So we have broad policies, but we also have individual circumstances, and any parent who has a concern, or a student, frankly, that's what our counselors are there for. That's what our principals and assistant principals are there for, to make sure that we meet the individual needs of our students.
Yeah, maybe this question is for either or both Mr. Samuels and Mr. Zaid. So in the spirit of our value around being inclusive, to what extent or in what capacity do our principals, through this PDSA cycle, and maybe this is a lead into you, Dr. Lund, principals, teachers, staff that are in our SPED programs, either participate in, are there additional and or different meetings, training specific to our SPED teachers and staff, and sort of what does that look like from a principal, teacher, staff level, given the complexity and the nuances, that it's not a one-size-fits-all. So curiosities around how our SPED teachers programming sort of through this lens, what that looks like.
So the training that we provide, that I'll elaborate upon, our special education teachers, our ed specialists in this case, partner with our content experts. So they will align to either an ELA content expert or a math content expert and participate side by side with those teachers in the trainings themselves. Many of those teachers are participating in co-teach sort of sessions at the secondary level. In particular, where they're in those classrooms with those content teachers and therefore can learn side by side with their general education peer in support of the instructional practice being implemented. So the strategies that Mr. Zaid had uplifted earlier around explicit learning intention, success criteria, engagement practices, rigorous tasks within the learning instruction, they can work collaboratively around that planning of those lessons in support of our students with IEPs.
Are there additional supports and or professional development or training for SPED teachers and staff?
So beyond that,
yeah.
Our functional academic teachers have separate training. So if you're in an MS program versus an MM or RSP program, there are specialized trainings in those areas as well. So they receive specific training around the functional academics coursework, for example, for their particular course. In addition, we have separate meetings for our special education teachers that Dr. Sosa Valderrama can elaborate upon in support of, obviously, the more IEP-oriented processes within special education.
Yeah, thank you. David, my apologies. Did I miss a memo? I've noticed a nuance in the pronunciation of your last name. Is it Zaid?
For the world to hear it. Yes, the correct pronunciation is Zaid. My last name is actually Arabic. In English, it's pronounced Zaid, which I've gone by for a number of years. But as a senior team, we've committed ourselves to learning and leading. And as I'm entering into my own personal learning, I am going by the way it should be pronounced, as opposed to the way I've always had it pronounced.
Thank you for that, Mr. Zaid. And I appreciate the courage, too, to speak to publicly. And my apologies for missing that.
You didn't. But I will just go back to your original question right before Dr. Sosa Valderrama speaks, and just say, during specifically the internal learning walks and the quality core visits, when we are walking classrooms, we do include our special day classes, our CCT classes, our success classes. We do include them as a part of that progress. So I just wanted to affirm that portion, that they are not excluded from that process. We are in those classrooms looking for high quality instruction.
And so within special education, we have our teaching and learning team, and they support schools in inclusion and any practices to support teachers, and we work collaboratively with OCIPD to send out coaches as needed. So the team is actually the team at OCIPD, but they have induction coaches and then other coaches that provide professional development for groups of teachers or individuals at schools.
So if we think about the Chief Academic Office, we routinely get to hear the privilege of hearing from Dr. Madrigal and her team. We just heard from Mr. Zaid and Mr. Samuels around the level offices. So the third component of that triangle then, of course, is our great Office of Curriculum, Instruction, and Professional Development. And so Dr. Lund can share the work going on around teacher and adult practice from his department as well.
So I'm excited to share really the hard work of almost 100 staff members within the Office of Curriculum, Instruction, and Professional Development in support of our level offices and in support of our teachers. Our district has made an enormous commitment to maintain the professional development that we initiated last year of face-to-face training with every teacher in our system. 600 plus trainings will be provided this year in support of teachers and their own learning around quality core instruction. So I'm going to go into details on what that looks like this year, and I want to uplift what you've talked about, Board Member Lopez, around what are we doing different, to make sure that we get different results from our trainings. So I guess historically, professional development is not always positively received by teachers. Generally speaking, there's a lot of research that says that teachers are often frustrated by professional learning experiences. That was not our experience last year. Our experience last year providing face-to-face training with teachers was incredibly positive in the realm of 92 to 99% in each of the indicators that we were looking back around feedback from teachers. Super positive results from teachers, and I'll elaborate on what we want to replicate in the training that made that positive, as well as what we want to shift to really have a deeper impact on classrooms themselves. So starting off with the why, you see the same why within our department, centering our students and the graduate portrait work, the vision work. We are in a unique place in OCIPD to really support the graduate portrait transitions when you think about shifts in coursework, shifts in curriculum, and shifts in instructional practice to better support students to meet those graduate portrait outcomes. Our how is through professional learning. It's obviously in the title of our department. Professional learning is an enormous lever that obviously not just education takes advantage of in support of how do you improve the outcomes for systems, but is an essential part of really within our system of education. How do we support adult learning in better support of student learning within our system? And then the what, of course, is the same outcomes that we've talked about around our board goals. When we talk about professional learning, there's really two key components to professional learning and what successful implementation looks like. It includes both the content of what we are covering within our trainings, as well as the structures we utilize to support adult learning. This is the same model that we have done training with in support of elementary and secondary principals in developing their site professional development plans. So you have district professional learning occurring at the same time as site professional learning. And I think there's been some really nice coherence that's been developed this year in particular around utilizing those common practices so that the site training works hand in hand with the district training, which hasn't always historically been the case. You could say that across 84 school sites, you might have one school that's doing their own training on this content that might be completely different than what we are providing at the district level. This year, our site PD plans are in tight alignment with our district PD plans. So sites are looking at their own data and finding where the strengths and weaknesses are within their own data and within their own teaching practices based on those walks that both Mr. Zaid and Mr. Samuels referred to, those internal learning walks and collaborative data, the collaborative visits, quality core visits, and looking at which of those QCI indicators, QCI elements, were strengths and weaknesses within that, and then determining their PD plan accordingly. So if the site determines that rigor wasn't something that we saw frequently in our visits, we're going to focus on rigor and what does higher level rigorous instruction look like within our professional development plan. Likewise, if learning intentions and success criteria weren't evident in our walks, we're going to focus on that as a key feature of our professional learning. So the focus of our content, all teachers this year will experience really a deepening of QCI implementation. And the reason this is important is we have a history in education also of moving on to the new thing. We cover content and then we move on to new content and new content and new content. And not often do we give teachers really processing time to really deepen their understanding of the core content. So a commitment we made this year was to really limit some of the new and to say we're going to go deeper with those quality core indicators and how we are defining what it means to plan and deliver quality core instruction. The second is rooting that work in culturally responsive work. So making sure that the practices that we're uplifting are culturally relevant, culturally responsive, culturally sustaining, and affirming in their practice. So that is integrated into the trainings that we are providing. The second large bullet there is around our math work. There is an acknowledgement, I think, nationwide that math is really struggling and math achievement is struggling. This is something that we are experiencing in Long Beach, but every district across the country is experiencing this as well. There are enormous shifts that need to take place in mathematics. We have a new math framework that was recently adopted by the state that will be rolling out this year, some of the key tenets to that framework. We have a new math adoption that will come to play next year that will guide math instruction moving forward. And we're doing real systemic work to really align elementary math instruction to secondary math instruction, which historically has been pretty disparate in how the approaches that were utilized by elementary teachers being often very different than the approaches being utilized by secondary math teachers. The next key piece there is around ELD and the expectation that designated ELD occurs on a daily basis throughout our system, which requires training and support for teachers. This is really focused on our ELA teachers who are primarily responsible for ELD instruction, in addition to those supplemental teachers that Mr. Samuels was talking about within our Enlace program, within our beginning ELD coursework, and within our CCR coursework. So all these teachers that explicitly deliver designated ELD instruction and making sure that they are comfortable in doing so and that this becomes an embedded daily practice across our school sites. An expectation at the elementary level that 30 minutes daily is spent in designated ELD. And at the secondary level within the block, within a middle school or secondary block, you looking at roughly 10 to 15 minutes of designated ELD on a daily basis. So this is English language development. So this is explicit teaching of English language within the 4 content domains of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And what does that look like to develop language across those 4 domains?
Dr. Land, do you know if we've seen an uptick this year and let's say in the last year in new arrivals?
We currently have roughly 100 students currently identified as newcomers. Last year at our peak, we hit around 170. Oftentimes between now and November is when we do experience additional students be identified as newcomers based on the LPAC. So many of them are still to be determined based on that initial LPAC result. So I imagine that'll probably reach close to what we've had historically, roughly between 150 and 200 students.
Again, I think for the public, important to know that ELD is required of all schools, but also our ELs are not just newcomers. We have ELs, many of whom were born in this country and have gone only through our system. So how many ELs do we have in the district?
We're probably looking at around 11,000, if I remember correctly, across our system. Newcomers represent a very small portion of that, actually. Most of our students, some of them test in at the beginning level. Some of them might test in at a slightly higher level that's somewhat or moderately developed. Some might test in at the fluent level, meaning that they speak Spanish or another language at home, but they are also fluent in English. So based on that initial LPAC is how they're identified, and that's administered within their first 3 months of schooling. And most of those are kindergarten students within our system that come in, though we do get newcomers in other grade levels as well, and that's what our Enlace program, which stands for Engaging Newcomers in Language and Content Education, was designed to support. For our students that are in schools that don't have an Enlace program, they are put into a beginning ELD course.
If I may, just a moment. As this year goes on, we'll have multiple opportunities to have staff talk with the board and share with the public about our work in support of our multilingual learners or English learners, whether it's bringing the EL Master Plan to all of you for approval later in the spring, also talking about all the various programming we have in place, our dual immersion, dual language programs. So we know this is a topic that we could spend a lot more time on, and we'll make sure that during the school year we come back to you as a board and share some updates on our progress.
So the last two there, we are piloting some interdisciplinary units. There was a reference to Grade First 8. That is a great example of an elementary interdisciplinary unit that attempts to really fully integrate history and science into literacy instruction, for example, really create relevance around math instruction. We are doing a pilot at the middle school level, connecting our ELA and our history content so that what students experience in their ELA classroom mirrors what they're experiencing in their history classroom, and they work in tandem in support of student learning. And then some interdisciplinary pilots that we're looking at the high school level around PBL and the use of our pathway industry-based work to really support, that relevance and real-world connection for students within the content. And then, of course, deepening that college career readiness aspect, the A to G coursework, the work-based learning work, the dual enrollment experiences that we are expanding across our system. We talk a lot about quality core instruction, so I want to define that for you. So quality core instruction is one rooted in our instructional vision, which you see there in the center. You've heard over the years reference to the understandings and expectations for quality core instruction. This is our instructional vision, our framework, if you will, around what good teaching should look like. These understandings and expectations were revised in 2018 to make them more culturally relevant and responsive, and they may end up going through another revision soon. As we've learned more, we've made revisions to that document. On the right-hand side there is what we're calling our QCI work. And Mr. Zaid had uplifted a number of those elements within that. This is our way of kind of operationalizing our understandings and expectations. It basically defines from a planning and delivery standpoint, what are those key components that need to be incorporated into a lesson that are high leverage components for student learning. So there you see examples of engagement, and that's not just physical, social, emotional engagement, but cognitive engagement. The use of scaffolds sparingly based on formative assessment that maintain rigor in learning. The use of really starting with a standards-based rigorous task within the work, which can include rigorous text from a literacy standpoint. So these key components that are really driving what the professional learning looks like within our system. These are grounded in really foundational work that we've done within OCIPD, in Gloria Latson-Billings' work around the 3 pillars of culturally responsive and relevant and responsive education. This is building upon Dr. Geneva Gay's work. So these 3 pillars obviously help guide our work. So when you think about cultural competence, really helping teachers see where culture and identity can be used as a vehicle to support student learning. Critical consciousness, to really develop a critical social political lens in support of analyzing and critiquing cultural norms, values, institutions, all in support of that 3rd pillar around academic success. So academic success requires good first teaching, and really leveraging those important key strategies in support of that. So it's grounded in our culturally responsive work, in support of our QCI work, as we move towards realizing our graduate portrait and our adult portrait. So we are in a unique place to support both of those. Doing face-to-face training, obviously we greatly impact how adults within the system, in this case teachers, can be different in support of students and their learning. So how do we help teachers being empowering facilitators of learning, being empathetic communicators, being champions for students in their work in support of these graduate portrait outcomes? Moving from the content to the structure. So last year, most of our training, I would say, fell within the surface learning category, that first category, around new content, new learning for teachers. As we move towards deeper learning and transfer learning within the system. So there are structures that schools can utilize. So this is a guide for schools around their own site professional learning, as well as what we use internally within our own curriculum teams in support of professional learning. That can support what I call surface or new learning. There, what you see listed here are common forms of learning that you attend a training, you attend a workshop, you attend a conference, you watch videos on new learning. This is all great and supports teachers with learning new content, but doesn't necessarily require any implementation. So I can sit through a class and not actually bring anything back and do anything different in my classroom. So our challenge that I've put towards our curriculum teams this year is how do we move towards deeper learning that requires more opportunities for modeling and practice, meaning that I want to see models of what this looks like in the classroom. What does it mean to create cognitive engaging tasks within a classroom? What does it mean to scaffold appropriately to those tasks? And then to practice. A lot of times we provide training to teachers, we don't give them opportunities to practice, and we expect them to implement. So being really intentional in how we are providing opportunities for teachers to practice the strategies that we are uplifting, and then using structures that actually require some level of implementation. So we have teams across our department that are doing their trainings out at school sites rather than at the TRC. And why would you do a training out at the school site? Because that's where learning occurs with students. And if you have classrooms there where learning is occurring, you can obviously incorporate that into your professional learning. Let's go into a classroom and see that practice. Let's go in and co-teach a lesson together. Let's go in and model a strategy together. Let's develop a lesson together. Let's go in and teach that lesson and see how it landed with students, and let's come back and revise that lesson together so we can uplift the effective use of those strategies in support of student learning. Did what we planned actually produce the results that we hope for with students? So these are structures that we've rolled out across the system in supporting principals and designing their professional learning, and then uplifting within our own curriculum teams, shifting professional learning into a more job-embedded practice. So what does this look like across our system? I referenced earlier that we are facilitating 615 trainings this year across LBUSD. So when you think about our 3,000 teachers, many of them, well, all of them will participate twice. So we will see 2 days with 3,000 teachers, 6,000 essentially teachers duplicated across trainings across our system. In addition, all elementary teachers will receive an additional 2 days of training. Mr. Zaid had uplifted that sort of K2 literacy focus, 3-5 math focus. We are maintaining that for this year. This is our last year, and then that will flip. So next year's training will shift to a K2 math focus and a 3-5 literacy focus. We are starting that shift this year. One of the days for K2 literacy will actually be in math to introduce the new math framework to our K2 teachers. One of the days for 3-5 teachers will be in literacy in support of designated ELD instruction, so that all elementary teachers have designated ELD training this year. In addition, all of our secondary ELA teachers and our grade 6 and grade 9 math teachers, in support of that transition that Mr. Samuels was talking about, that 5th to 6th transition, 8th to 9th transition, will receive an additional 2 days of professional learning. All of our teachers will have the quality core instruction components that I alluded to as part of their training, including the culturally responsive components of that training. All K-12 literacy teachers, anyone that is a teacher of literacy, will have designated ELD training this year. And that's building upon the integrated ELD training that they had last year. And then finally, the middle school ELA and history teachers, through the pilot that we're working on, we'll have an additional day of training in support of what does good interdisciplinary instruction training look like. So we're going to pull the ELA and history teachers together into the same space to plan together around that common unit of study. So this is the broad professional learning logistics across our system. Some of this is the same as last year in terms of content, but really shifting how we do the training, where the training occurs, the incorporation of job-embedded practices within that work, and a more fine-tuned focus around ELD and around math instruction in particular. Okay.
So I know we were asking questions along the way, sharing insights, so we're just a little bit over, but maybe take a few more minutes if you have any wonderings, questions, insights.
Thank you, Dr. Lund. Just to follow up, so notwithstanding so many of our teachers going above and beyond, attending trainings, conferences, videos, and, keeping up to date with the latest strategies, techniques, and pedagogical approaches, and happy to hear that we got that 92 to 99% range in terms of positive feedback. What are we here, what's the word on the street in the classroom, the symbolic street? What are we hearing in terms of what teachers are finding most useful or most helpful, and or things that we're still trying to figure out?
Yeah, that's a great question. Part of our trainings this year will incorporate those similar feedback loop questions that we've utilized this past year to making sure that we're continuing to embed those get the positive results that we'd intended. In addition, we're asking teachers what additional supports they want and need in support of their practice. So this includes specifically, similar to the menu of collaborative structures, what additional opportunities would you like to support your learning? Would you like opportunities to co-plan lessons together? Would you like opportunities to see video recorded examples of those lessons? Would you like opportunities to engage in a lesson study with your team so that we can actually send out coaches when they're not doing training to provide that additional support to further their learning? Because in all reality, teachers want to do best on behalf of their students. And they want opportunities to see models of what that looks like, and they want opportunities to practice that. They want to be successful. Where they get frustrated is when we do a training and we expect implementation and we haven't supported them accordingly, and then they get frustrated when the implementation happens and the feedback they get is only from their students and goes, that didn't work, I'm never doing that again. We want to make sure that they don't feel that way. So how do we support them along the way to really recognize that adult learning requires some progression of implementation? And once again, that acknowledgement of surface to deeper to transfer learning is really that implementation gap, if you will, across each stage.
One thing I would add, the most efficient way for Dr. Lund and his team to provide training for teachers is to bring 150 people into a room, regardless of the grade that you teach or the content that you teach. And we've had to do that at times over the years because of staff that we have available to do the training. What we did last year, though, was all of the training was by grade level, by subject, small groups in elementary at the school site. And I believe that was some of the really positive feedback we received from teachers, was that they appreciated the really tailored professional learning opportunities by content, by grade level, small groups, job embedded.
Yeah, so our history team is leading all the training for our history teachers. Our VAPA team is leading all the training for our VAPA teachers. So that, I think, really increases the relevance and the credibility when you have content area experts really supporting teachers in each unique content area. In addition, I would say both Mr. Saeed had uplifted the work of our ELA, our literacy leads, our reading leads, and our math leads. So we also support them through additional training. And Mr. Samuels had talked about the IICs. We also support them with additional training so that there's a level of coherence between what the training that our leads are receiving and how they are supporting teachers. And this is part of a long-term plan of how do we transition that site support to the leads so that if your teachers want to see more models, then the leads can play that role in being that model in the classroom. If the teachers want a lesson study to be facilitated, the leads can facilitate that with them, or the IICs can facilitate that with them, utilizing site release time support.
Dr. Baker, is that, in practical terms, one of our biggest challenges, like taking these research-based, evidence-based, sort of innovative, cutting edge, whether it's an approach, an idea, a strategy, and then converting that into what kind of support, professional development, I mean, back to the cohesion and alignment, and then actually providing the necessary support in the classroom to operationalize these big shifts in our system?
Absolutely. We are the fourth largest in the state, complex educational system that depends on us to think about the systematic, intentional approach as has been described just so beautifully. I'm so proud of what our team has been able to share today, but moving from individual schools or many individual classrooms that have had success because of a teacher and because of what they've been able to do, in some cases on their own or because of a learning experience they've had, to a systematic research-based approach so that every teacher, by design, as was shared, is equipped to meet the needs of students in new ways at a system level. And that is what I think was represented today. So, yeah.
Really quickly, from my students' perspective, I really appreciate the extra efforts that have gone into the success of the grades 5 to 6 transition and the 8 to 9 transition, because those are really pivotal years in a student's education, and it can be tricky for them to navigate that and to find their way and their success in that. So with the extra trainings for the grade 9 and 6 math teachers, as well as the web and link crew programs, I know as a students we really appreciate those, and they do really help in making that transition easier and making us more successful.
Thank you, Alana. I was kind of hoping you'd weigh in on the link crew thing and that transition from 8 to 9, since it's kind of recent for you. But I'm glad that you found part of the presentation, very relevant to what your own experience is. And I want to thank everybody. It is wonderful to hear about the priorities, the values, how things are being implemented, the alignment from our TK program all the way up to high school, and how things are being done. So I want to thank you very much. We are going to take a break. We're going to try and, oh, I'm sorry, did I run right past you?
I just had one question, and I apologize for coming in and out here. EJ had a very important doctor's appointment, and I wanted to ask the doctor a couple questions, so that's why I had to run out of here, so apologize for coming in and out. But I initially had my mic on earlier when I was hearing Mr. Samuels talk a little bit about our high schools, and I was very curious about the APEX program in particular. I know we had a presentation, it might have been a year ago or so now, when we were studying, we were looking at the statistics of students when they initially get off track. And you already highlighted that in your conversation, where you spoke to it is probably most indicative on a student's success on if they'll be A through G ready in the 9th grade, right? And so one of the things that came of that conversation was putting a heightened level of, let's call it emphasis or interest on where we can provide intervention, even though obviously we never want to put them in the position to need the intervention, right? And so when you're speaking to the program like APEX, which can act as one of those tools of intervention, I just had a couple of small questions. First of all, I was really, really excited to see that, and you already hit 2 to 3 of my questions as you were talking about it, but one of which was just confirmation. Can you confirm the availability of using the APEX program? So if I'm a student who has unfortunately performed under the best of my ability, I'm using every PC word I got right now, in an English class, but I want to get back on track going into 10th grade, when can I use something like APEX?
Yeah, one thing that's wonderful about APEX is that we have a district license. And so every school has access to it. And so generally what happens, our counselors really do a fantastic job of monitoring our students. They meet with students regularly. And once the grades come in and a kid sees that he or she did not meet the standards that they had set for themselves, they can immediately go to a counselor and say, hey, I want to retake a class, and I could do it through Apex. And oftentimes our counselors are beating them to the punch and are pulling kids in and is trying to find a way to help them build that into their schedule.
And that was going to go into my next point here. So if I did add an Apex course to my already six class schedule, how does that affect my GPA?
In terms of your GPA, you're looking at that grade will pretty much will go on your transcript to replace that grade.
Okay.
And there are different rules for different courses, but for the most part, if a kid had a failing grade and they would get a C, then we go with the C.
Okay.
You know.
Okay. And I just want to confirm, just for my knowledge, so if I had 6 classes per semester, in my 9th grade year, I didn't perform well in my English class. Going into my 10th grade year, if I have my normal 6 and I sign up for that 7th Apex class, that grade will technically replace the previous F? Mm-hmm. Great. That's what I liked. That's what I wanted to know.
Because that's how we get them back on track.
Correct.
It's to recover that credit that you lost.
Okay.
And so now you've recovered it if you passed the class successfully.
Great. All right. Thank you. And once again, my apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I'm sorry I didn't notice that your light was on. But those were really great questions, and I'm glad you asked them because that provides that clarification about that Apex program, and I appreciated that. Okay, so we are going to try and get back here in 10 minutes because we have another important topic to cover. So if everybody could be here, what do you think about 8 minutes? Is that too much? If we can try and get back like at 8, because we're going to need like every minute possible. 11:25, so we're going to reconvene at 11:25. All right, welcome back, everybody. I know that was a quick break, but we have a whole nother discussion this morning, and that discussion is on effective governance practices. And I'll just start by saying that the board is currently working with Wayne and AJ regarding board governance. AJ's not always able to join us in person because he's out of state. And I believe we're going to have a representative this morning on Zoom. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. We're trying to make it happen now where someone who works with AJ can join us via Zoom, but we're technically trying to make that happen at the moment.
Okay. So if that works out, we will have a coach joining us, because today we're going to be focusing on board bylaws. Excuse me, and how the bylaws can be tailored to best suit our board's mission for student outcome focused work. And the board has been given a set of questions by Wayne and AJ, and today we're going to be addressing the first question, and specifically the top response from the board. So Wayne gathered the responses from all 5 board members, and there were areas of commonality, and I guess I'll back it up and say that before we get into a discussion of the board responses to the question or questions, we will begin by talking about student outcomes focused governance. And I'll provide a little bit of background. The framework was created by a group of Council of Great City Schools board members and superintendents with the intention of defining and supporting effective governance. And according to their work, the definition of student outcomes is a measure of school system results that are student results rather than adult results. Outcomes that are a measure of what students know or are able to do. Student outcomes are distinct from adult outcomes. And I think this works really well with the conversation that we had earlier, the presentation, I should say, about adult input, the alignment, coherence, and strategies that get us to the student outcome. So I think it's a nice balance. We talked about the adult side of things earlier, and now we're going to be focusing on the student outcome part. And I'll just add, and I'm paraphrasing from AJ, but student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change. Patterns of behaviors that are exhibited in the boardroom can reasonably be expected to be found paralleled in the classroom. And I know that relates directly to at least one of the slides that we saw today. And the Student Outcomes Governance Framework is built around 6 research-informed competencies that describe school board behaviors and the degree to which they create the conditions for improvements in student outcomes. And those 6 conditions would be vision and goals, and we've laid that out nicely. We've even gone over that earlier today. Values and guardrails, monitoring and accountability, communication and collaboration, unity and trust, and then continuous improvement. And I remember AJ telling us when we started this process, it's 4 years ago now, when we started this process, he said, once you agree and adopt your goals and guardrails, then the hard part starts. And we really had no way of knowing what that meant exactly because we had never, excuse me, participated in that process. We had never developed board goals before. This is a new thing for our district. So it was very hard to imagine that even though we had gone through this very long process with engaging with the community, with being responsive to what the needs are of our district, and coming up with our goals, to consider, okay, how is the next part going to be the hard part? Well, I think the last year has shown us the challenges and what the hard part is, because we are now responsible for making sure the monitoring is going the way or is being conducted in a way that shows our work and the work of everyone in the district is going towards these student outcomes. And so that's not easy. As we heard this morning, changes have to be made according to, are we meeting those interim goals? Are there successes? How are things working with professional development? How are strategies aligned with the needs of the individual schools, the individual classrooms? And truly that is the hard part, because we have to be on our toes in a way that might feel new and different to us as a group, as a board. We have not done this before. And so I felt that it was important for us today to just revisit the reason that we started this work. And the reason we started this work is because each board member committed to making student outcomes our main focus. That everything we do as a board would be because we want to see the success of our students, every student. So I wanted to start the conversation grounded in that it's the student outcomes that dictates everything that we do. So the discussion that I'd like to have today, we're going to start with board bylaws. So board bylaws, remembering that we are centering that work in student outcomes. So with that in mind, I'm gonna just mention what the question was, because we're gonna go with the first question, and that question is, and this was asked of each individual board member, what do you want to see accomplished with the board bylaws project? And the number one answer that I believe was from all five of us, maybe it wasn't all five of us.
I would say a majority.
Majority, okay. So with the majority, would be that the bylaws need to be tailored to a student outcome-focused governance that the board has adopted to ensure student outcome monitoring exists in every board meeting agenda, and ensure that the majority of agendas and meetings are dedicated to student outcomes in order to efficiently achieve board goals. So that's the starting point. And so I want to give each board member a chance to weigh in, and just as a suggestion for the discussion, today's conversation is more of a brainstorming session. We're not making any decisions right now. It's just about gathering information and hearing from each board member on how we can do that, how we can ensure that a student outcome-focused result is embedded in the board agendas and the board meetings. So,
Just a quick clarifying question. Mr. Strumford, was the public made aware? I didn't see it in the agenda, but I thought we wanted to be sure that the public knew what questions we were being asked. So the first question that President Craig had referenced, does the public know what questions were asked of us? And if so, where is that information?
Yeah. No, not yet. So when AJ and I sent out, or I sent out, based on AJ and my conversation, when I sent out the questions to the board, I received the final answers just over the weekend. And so
are you looking at someone in particular here, Wayne?
So we haven't had a chance to really delve in. AJ and I are meeting on Thursday morning to go over the answers and to delve into those and to kind of figure out, okay, how can we put together some draft bylaws or have a further conversation with the board in discussion of that. So this is kind of premature in a way to go very far today on this. But in I think probably the next board meeting or whenever we're able to meet again, those questions will be public. We'll have a much more of a robust discussion as a whole on the topic of the bylaws. This is sort of just like an early brainstorm. In talking to AJ this morning, what he asked is he wants to be able to watch this tomorrow or I guess later today or tomorrow, and just understand board members where you are on this and kind of your thoughts on the start of this process.
So I think we should definitely focus on student outcomes, but we should also make sure that we are protecting that public comment time and even extending it, board member report, and of course allowing for questions and discussion on agenda items.
oh, Dr. Benitez?
Yeah, and Jeff, could you
if I can
clarify?
have one clarification. The actual questions, as part of the materials that went out to the public and posted, were those questions in addition to the current bylaws. So at least the framing of those three questions did go out as part of the public materials.
Public, just not our
Just no
summarized
responses.
responses.
Correct.
Okay. And those are on the agenda as posted, Jeff?
Correct.
Okay,
as,
good.
As the backup materials for the posting.
Yeah, and again, because Diana referenced this first question, I just wanted to make sure that folks knew what we were responding to. And when we get the summarized discussion, I just wanted to make sure the public was aware that we did get questions. So I like your sentiments, Diana, around having this initial first brainstorming session. My original reservation when this was brought up at a previous meeting on whether to cut board reports or what to do, my original reservation about having any conversation related to agendas, meetings, format of agendas, agenda items, how we get agenda items onto one of our meetings, was based on the premise that I think we need to be on the same page, and I'm not saying we're not, but I think we need to affirm that we're on the same page on what we are deeming to be student outcomes focused items. We were, in a good way, let off the hook a little bit because I believe members of our team did the initial analysis of how much time we were devoting to student outcomes focused items. And we got a report that I think all of us sort of agreed with, that we need to be spending more time on this in the midst, again, of adopting a monitoring calendar, all that stuff. And when I say let off the hook, it's not being appreciative of the work that went behind minute by minute doing an analysis. But I wonder, would we all label certain things as student outcomes or not? All right, and would we all have a different lens on what we're correlating to being a student outcomes agenda item or not. So that was my reservation, right? I'm all for having a student outcomes focused agenda. I'm all for majority of our time being spent on that, maximizing our meetings, and then making decisions accordingly. My reservation is about taking deeper dives, and I'm affirming the appreciation for being intentional, taking deeper dives into bylaws and policies without affirming that that we have the same understanding of what we mean by student outcomes focused governance, that we have a clear understanding of at least what the research and the literature, and in this case, AJ's book says about what the purpose of school systems are. And it's very clear, right? The literature is very clear. School systems are here to improve student outcomes. That's the whole reason. That's, I think, our firm belief in public education, right? The business of us is to make sure that we uphold our community's values and visions around student success, but our system is specifically, historically, and more so today, set up to improve those outcomes. The affirmation, I guess, if AJ, when AJ and his team watch this, and if we have someone jump in, is I think a refresher, an anchor in how are we defining what student outcomes are, then I think facilitates an authentic, genuine, and clear conversation around making decisions on what's student-focused or not in an agenda. All right, we've passed board goals, we've passed guardrails, but it's a different nuance to then make a determination, are we spending 39 minutes on this? Well, maybe a colleague of mine thinks we're spending 48 minutes on something, but maybe I'm not looking at that discussion as being student outcomes focused. Maybe we're getting outputs, and today we got some outputs, right? Would we consider today's presentation, I have curiosities, as being student outcomes focused? Right, and maybe part of it was, maybe part of it wasn't, but how would we then determine and assess ourselves on whether we're truly upholding a student outcomes focused framework? So that I wanted to clarify that, because I'm certainly 100% for us streamlining, maximizing our time, but I think we have to have a common understanding of how we're defining and understanding what student outcomes are, and then what do those look like through a governance lens, through a public testimony lens, through a disclosure of confidential and privileged information, through our agenda planning process, through the rules of order for our board members. Just want to be mindful that we've never adopted officially Robert's Rules of Order, but we loosely engage in parliamentary governance here. So I want to start off with a baseline, right? What is student outcomes? So I think what I'm asking for here, Wayne, is for AJ and or a member of his team to help facilitate that we have a clear and common understanding and definition of what student outcomes are. And then that way, when we get into discussions about how we should be spending our time, how we develop agendas, what criteria we use, right? We have some language in terms of members of the public requesting for items to be put on agendas, but we have some criteria for that, right? So what are we going to consider as a board, and then in our respective discussions about that?
Just to add to that, I think the idea from talking to AJ is that we will come back to the board at some point soon when it works on the agenda, and AJ will do exactly that in sort of a preface to then providing some sample bylaws, some bylaws that have been used in boards that practice this. And start that discussion of looking to see how we amend our bylaws, or how we have new bylaws or different bylaws, and how to go about doing that. So I think that's the idea that I think AJ and I have of how to present this to the board at the next appropriate time, if that's something that the board would like.
If you find it appropriate in that communication, Wayne, I would actually ask AJ, if we have the ability to do that, to watch part of our previous presentation, not just this aspect of it. And in particular, I really like a line, I'm paraphrasing here, Dr. Baker, that Dr. Baker used to describe something in the presentation. And I was like, oh, would that fit to student outcomes, right? And I think what you said, Jill, was those things that have a direct line, and I'm gonna then ad lib here, direct line to student outcomes versus those things that have a dotted line to student outcomes. Everything in our district has a dotted line to student outcomes. How do we determine those things that have a direct line to student outcomes and in the same spirit, a direct line to those goals that we've been talking about? So I think, again, the framing that Dr. Baker provided this earlier this morning, I think would help AJ sort of get a sense of the pulse of where our district is at.
Okay, so to take that a step further, as far as, like, say, student outcomes, I know that we need to refocus our efforts and get on the same page. And I'm wondering how, do you have ideas on how we can do that? I don't know if I'm not feeling comfortable in polling each of the board members to find out if we're on the same page or not. And I know you talked about the direct line, the dotted line. Is there something else we can? Discuss or present that makes it more clear what we're talking about as far as student outcomes? Or, well, I'm asking anybody, will we just wait until we have a coach from the Council of Great City Schools before we determine that baseline, that foundation in our effort to work on this? What I'm feeling is maybe it's hard to move on from this point because it seems as though working on the bylaws, I thought today we were going to have a discussion on, working on those bylaws and gathering suggestions, and it seems like we're kind of stuck and we're not moving forward.
I'm kind of here for you. So it depends on what the five of you want to do. As I mentioned, for me, the process is that on Thursday, AJ and I are going to meet. We're going to kind of go through the answers we received to the questions and start looking at how the bylaws and how the student outcome focused governance works with all that, and start putting together some drafts for review for the board, and then come back along with AJ, who will provide some coaching to discuss the governance model and how that will work with the bylaws. So as for today, I think if any of you have any thoughts on that, I know I've talked to a couple of you on this. If you have some thoughts that you want to share regarding that process, or what you're thinking, I think it'd be. I would love to hear it. I know AJ will review it. I'll go from there.
Okay,
Just
Dr.
two
Benitez.
process questions, Mr. Miller. One is, given that Jeff affirmed that the questions are public, I think it would be a good idea for maybe you to read what the questions are, or highlight what those questions are before we get the summarized response analysis or organization. The second is, process-wise, is the idea here, and maybe there's a question to my colleagues instead of a clarifying, that we would have a standing item on upcoming agendas to continue this conversation, that we would identify at future meetings through an agenda item to come back to this conversation. So I would like to continue the conversation, after Thursday, whatever you and AJ analyze. So a process question, is that then going to be an agenda item on our next meeting or at a future meeting? Just want to figure out, okay, what could we do today? What do we do the next step? Kind of process-wise, timelines and framing, Wayne.
Yeah, and what I need to do is find out AJ's availability and what the agenda looks like even in 2 weeks, right? So the 16th, I'd find out if AJ's available, and we could come back based on the work we do between Thursday and then, and go forward. I don't have a clear concept at this moment of how long this will take. I think it's sort of going to decide on the board. And when AJ and I come back with a kind of a draft product, you can say, wow, this is great, this is where we want to go as a board. Or we can say, okay, we have some concerns here, we want to do this, and have that discussion. So it's hard to know exactly, are we going to put this on every board meeting for the next couple months? Is it going to be once a month, depending on really what the feedback is and what we're able to develop based on that feedback?
Yeah. If I can make a suggestion, and once again, we're just brainstorming here. I think that it would be beneficial for us if this was one of the report outs that we had during our working groups. Even if we don't have a report, it would at least be something that we're being consistent on in regards to checking the status of the update of our bylaws until we feel that we firmly have them established. And it really just holds us accountable as a board to continue to keep this top of mind.
So are you suggesting that we create maybe a superintendent advisory group or a committee that would not be a quorum, so it'd be two board members working on the bylaws? Is that what you're suggesting?
I think so. This is something that Jeff and I talked about. Not necessarily this topic in particular, but the creation of ad hoc committees to address what I think is board activity, which is obviously board bylaws is. And so I'll actually refer to our subject matter experts here. Is that something that we can do as a board without any major hiccups, and once again, understanding from a functionality standpoint with what you're doing with AJ, would that work? Once again, we're just brainstorming. If it doesn't work, then we'll come up with another idea.
Yeah, it could work. I would say that it's a board-created committee, so it would be a Brown Act committee, and I'm looking at Jeff, and he seems to be nodding.
Yes, I believe we can look into that a little bit further. So there's a potential that it's a Brown Act related meeting if it's an ad hoc committee for a specific purpose. If it's only, my recollection, I'll verify, if it's only 2 members of the board and no other members of the public, then it can be an ad hoc committee without a Brown Act meeting, agendized meeting. If other members are participating in that, I think that brings it within the Brown Act in terms of an agendized meeting, which just means it needs to be an agendized ad hoc committee meeting.
Yeah, and it would be open to the public. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
And to be clear, at least in principle, the reason why I think that this is most beneficial for us is that it keeps it top of mind, one, and then it also holds us accountable consistently as we have each of our board meetings until we feel very firmly in the functions of the board, functions of board members, and alignment with our student outcome focused governance.
I would, my suggestion from my perspective, for what it's worth, is I think that's for brainstorming, I think that's a good thought to have. I would suggest maybe we wait until next meeting and see where we're going and where AJ is before we make that decision as to, hey, is this going to be a 4 to 6 month project, or is this going to be a 30-day to 45-day project and we're going to move it along quick? I don't know the answer to that. I don't have a feel for that yet. So that would just be my suggestion from my perspective.
So what I'm hearing is, this is good because we're brainstorming, and this is good because we're going over ideas, we're collecting ideas, and we'll make a decision at a later date once we have more input and hear from our coach from the Council of Great City Schools. So correct me if I'm wrong.
I think Doug has a.
Well, excuse me, all I was going to say is we have a committee, our advisory committee on student outcome-focused governance already, and maybe to clarify this and make it, I appreciate brainstorming, I think it's a great idea, but if you want to, we had to start from someplace, and maybe that subcommittee or that committee, that advisory committee, could come up with a report as a way of getting the conversation started. Right now, it's just kind of like, I don't know, Marty, what do you think? I don't think it goes very far. We need something to push off of. For example, in response to the questions that we were given, I looked into where it was that our bylaws came from, and the California School Board Association is one group, and there's another group, and I wanted to get that understanding. The questions that were asked, I think, were questions that went beyond just what the bylaws were or could be, but how do our meetings go, and is this what we want, and is it a good idea? But I think we need some structure, and that could come from a committee, and we have an advisory committee now that could bring some information to the board substantively, and I don't think that would be any violation of any laws that I know of or processes.
But if, excuse me, but if there are board members who are not part of that committee and want to be pretty involved in this process, what would that look like?
Yeah, that is an issue. If, let's say, we have a majority of the board members who want to be in the process, it's going to be a board meeting. And that's completely fine. We can make that happen. We can, as someone mentioned, sort of a standing item on the agenda. Again, not knowing what this project really looks like yet. It's hard to know the answer to that. But yeah, if a majority of the board wants to be involved, it's going to be a board meeting, and it either can be, we can either have certain special meetings or special workshops to do this, or we could take a block of time at the scheduled board meetings. Again, it'll be determined by the board how you want to approach that.
Yeah, if I can weigh in on that, Wayne. So I know we're not making a decision about it, but my preference would be for as many or all of us to participate in those conversations. I think that's why we had this be on this agenda item. And I guess in building on Mr. Otto's point, or part of Mr. Otto's point, as I understand it, the superintendent's advisory committees, because they were constituted by the superintendent, fall under a separate purview than an ad hoc committee that would be created by this board. And I'm good with that, but my understanding of the student advisory, superintendent's advisory groups, not committees, groups, fulfilled a different purpose. For my meetings with Dr. Madrigal, Mr. Moskovitz, it was more on sort of getting feedback, input, giving some, feedback on presentations, some debriefing, which all members of our board are able to do. I know you were working and having some drop-in hours, consulting hours, but any one of us can and should be meeting with staff on an ongoing basis. That's why we asked the superintendent to get us the presentation materials 7 days in advance. And again, because not all of us can attend the meetings at the same time, I appreciate having a sort of standing, whatever we're going to call this, Mr. Marcus will give us check-in hours, drop-in hours. We have a business, budget, and policy advisory group, which my suggestion was, I think both Wayne and Jeff were in that meeting when we decided I would like to keep the bylaws and governance policies and related stuff separate from that group, because when Diana and I report out from that group, it's in two different buckets. One is updates that we need to make, codify certain practices and things, which then gives my colleagues at least a meeting in advance, opportunity to check in, assess drafts, things like that. And then those policies that require more discussion that then we would bring in as individual policies. So my reservation here is that it also kind of blurs what we're doing in the superintendent advisory groups if we add this piece to either an already standing advisory group and or to the budget, business, and policy advisory group. So I would, thinking out loud and brainstorming here, I'd like for us to all be able to participate in an agendized Brown Act meeting, whether it's attached to one of our existing meetings, and or we have a special meeting with AJ. And I know schedules and all that stuff gets into effect, but because it is a delicate and in some ways fickle process and set of conversations, I think all of us should have equal opportunity and public opportunity to weigh in on things that could get locked in to the culture of governance in our district for the next 3 to 5 years in alignment with our board goals and monitoring calendars. One of the principles that AJ used, and Mr. Otto and I participated in some of these trainings, is those board goals and guardrails, and then all the work that goes into, this last year, all the work that has gone into, hence my question, Dr. Baker, like when we talk about cohesion and alignment, it's a lot of effort that goes into that. I would hate for that to be undone just because one or two or a majority of us potentially either don't run for reelection or get unseated as board members. Because then a new group would come in and be like, we didn't like what those 2 people did or what that person did, and then change board goals potentially. But if it's locked into governance and policies, well, now we're talking about having to vote and change things that are standing, right? So to me, the difference between codifying something, having to brainstorm on something, reporting out on something, versus having a full-blown board discussion and decision locks it into part of the institution and the culture that we're here to represent.
Yeah, and I also think with bylaws, at least in my mind, it's less, you're relying less on staff and more on yourselves. You're determining bylaws, you're determining how you're going to run as a board. These are your rules. And it's really not a staff thing, right? It's really your thing. So it does make sense that this would be something that all 5 board members are involved in a public meeting and have that discussion. Again, without really knowing what this is going to look like exactly, I think that makes sense.
To be clear on my comment, I don't want to exclude people. In fact, I think that the idea was to bring some information to consider by the board, and then the board can have that kind of discussion rather than just say, what do you think right now? It would structure it a little bit, but it certainly wouldn't result in anybody being not able to comment. I'm not talking about a report about what should be done. I'm just talking about background information, which it seems to me would be helpful.
Something I might add to Wayne is in your conversations with AJ and or members of his team, in August, I took notes, and we were attempting to really think about the work of the board and the work of staff, and not separating ourselves, but being mutually supportive of one another as a governance team, and then as staff activating on the goals and guardrails that have been established. One of the things that may be an anchor to start with, in addition to some clarification on what constitutes student outcome focused conversation, is the self-assessment that is part of the governance process. And at the top of my notes, in addition to what has been said about how meeting time is spent and ensuring alignment to student outcomes and what constitutes student outcomes, is conducting a board self-assessment in tandem with the superintendent's evaluation processes. And just as we often talk about like what drives behaviors, what are you working on, I think by using the self-assessment tool, it will help to clarify, not maybe to the grain size of what you're talking about, Dr. Benitez, about individual items, but it really lays out in those 6 categories that you spoke of, President Craighead, this assessment process. Where are we now? Which is very different than where we were 4 years ago. I mean, you can take a lot of pride in movement along. It's described as a continuum from not student outcome focused to mastering on the other end. There are elements in each of those areas that I think you can take pride in and will help to drive the conversation about what bylaws should exist so that, for example, one of the areas of unity and trust. Well, a lot of that does come out to, I think you shared, Mr. Otto, Ms. Lopez, about the interactions of the board are then codified in bylaws. And there's a student outcome focused governance kind of way of thinking about that I know you're seeking to have in bylaws. So that could be a really good starting point in addition to some of the clarification.
Well, I appreciate you referencing the self-evaluation tool, because when I was answering my questions, I was referring to the self-evaluation tool because I wanted to make sure that my focus was big picture and my focus was on aligning everything to that student-focused governance. So I had that self-assessment tool or self-evaluation tool at my right hand when I was doing that. and so I will just weigh in and say, it feels to me that these discussions need to be in a special meeting because we need time for discussion. And if we do that as part of our regularly scheduled board meetings, I don't think we'd have the freedom to take up an hour and a half of people's time in the evening for this work leading up to the self-evaluation. I feel like there's work to be done before we can even get to that point again, and revisit the self-evaluation tool, because I feel it's necessary for us to take a look at the bylaws and to make sure that the bylaws are tailored to our needs as far as what we've declared to be our board goals, our guardrails, the vision that we have for the district. But it also feels important that we have the discussion publicly and that we have the discussion with all board members contributing. And I can see that as maybe an ad hoc committee where you compile information and bring forth information that we can discuss as a board, or we can just jump into it as a board for that discussion. But I do feel that bylaws needs to be one of the first discussions, because that kind of sets the tone and gives us framework for what we want to be doing. But definitely within that self-evaluation tool, it talks about having efficient meetings, what to do to get to that point where you're having efficient meetings. And so these are all things that I'm looking forward to hearing from our Council of Great City Schools coach, because these discussions need to be led with somebody that has experience in that area. And I think that's the hard part that I'm feeling personally, because of where we at in the whole process. So I look forward to having that coach, just to make sure that we're, not. It feels to me like we're kind of slogging through mud a little bit here, and so I think a coach will help.
It might also be a good time to entertain the idea of a board retreat. I know that's something that you all have talked about, we've talked about, and that hasn't materialized as of yet, but this is feeling like one of those points, and perhaps ask AJ about his not just weekday availability, but it may be easier for working board members and others to, when things are quieter, to have a Saturday or Friday evening, Saturday retreat. And so maybe that's a conversation with him as well.
Yeah, and I can certainly do that. my thought is, without knowing AJ's schedule, as we look to, our goal would be to come back on the 16th. If there's room on the agenda, I don't know what it looks like yet, but at least for a little bit more discussion with AJ about this, and by then he and I will have a chance to have discussed everyone's responses, have sort of a feel for what we're looking at here, and have additional conversation. But to go full board into it, I think the idea of, I know everyone has probably other things to do, maybe on a Saturday, but it may be a great idea to have a retreat and say, you know what, because this could easily be, I don't want to scare anybody, but this could easily be an all-day when it comes down to approving the draft bylaws and going through them and making sure the board is good with it. It could be an all-day thing. It really could. So that's I'll check in with AJ on that if that's something the board is willing to entertain, and we can go forward from there. But I think if, from what I'm hearing, we can try to put an item on for the 16th, have AJ, I don't know if he'll be here or by Zoom, but we can have kind of a follow-up and kind of an update as to what we've done over the past, what he and I have done over the past week and a half, have more discussion about the questions you have, and then go from there and maybe even start thinking about having a retreat scheduled at that point.
Wayne, and just to circle back, I figured out my confusion here with whether the questions were posted or not. One of my morning agendas has the questions, the other one doesn't. So just in the spirit of transparency, if you don't mind, I'll read the questions. This was a communication to the board that was sent by Wayne to start the process of board, I'm summarizing the top part, to start the process of Board of Education reimagining board bylaws. I am asking each one of you to assist me by answering the following questions. I'll just read them verbatim. First question, what do you as an individual board member want to see accomplished with this effort? Second question, what specific issues do you see as problematic in the way the board currently conducts their business? And the third question, what is impeding the board from fully implementing the student outcomes focused governance that is currently in place? So apologies, that's why I was confused, because one of my copies had the questions, another one didn't. But as you affirmed, Jeff, these are publicly available as a document to our communities.
So if we would choose to do a retreat, would that, well, it would have to be agendized, and it would be open to the public, and, okay. And would it also be live streamed or recorded to make it available?
We have to check with Mr. Itzen, but my assumption would be yes. Yeah.
And that's a decision of the board. That's not required. You're not required to live stream it. If you're doing a working session where you're looking and lining out, and as we have done with some things related to Vision 2035, you could have parts of it that, or you could decide that you of course post and follow all the Brown Act. But if you're doing a working session, the board can decide to not, it's not required that you're live streaming it.
Okay, so if we choose to do a retreat, that would include a discussion of the bylaws, and we may be doing a line-by-line thing, or would be gathering information, so that wouldn't necessarily have to be live streamed or recorded, but definitely open to the public.
Correct. The Brown Act requires if there's more than, or if there's a majority of the board present in a meeting, that becomes a meeting, and that has to be open to the public. There is no Brown Act requirement of it being streamed or videotaped at all. We do that because it's what we want to do and to be accessible to the public, but that's not required. that would be a decision we'd have to make as to whether it would be good television or not, I guess, on the retreat, right? It may not be something that would necessarily be particularly interesting online, but you know, you can decide
Well,
that.
I am going to stop you right there. I just think this is fascinating. And I'm sure everybody's going to tune in.
Must
and
see
watch
TV.
Yeah, and watch that. But, okay, I appreciate the clarification. And so I just want to make sure, I just want to make sure that we're making that, making that point, clear to everyone, all the millions of people that watch.
Well,
So-
and I also sometimes think of a retreat. I always think of like a cabin somewhere up in the hills where you guys can, really think. It might be right here, right? Yeah, we could. Yeah. You could come in, green screen, and you could come in jeans. That.
Okay, so green screen and come in jeans.
Is that a motion?
Oh, no, we are not, no, we're not making any decisions. This is a brainstorming activity, and I think we're coming up with some good ideas. I think hearing from my colleagues, I'm hearing where our priorities are with this, where it sounds like we have some direction. But would any of the board members like to weigh in? Mr. Miller?
Just really quickly, one of the things that I stated earlier in the meeting is that I had a conversation with Jeff just about the structure of hosting or the board having small committees to revisit important topics, one of which that I was thinking and I suggested at the last board meeting was centered around Juan's favorite topic, right? Right, and his college, which is the college promise. But more importantly, when I was talking with Jeff, I was talking about just the structure in which we would do so, because I do think that from a board, now I'm just speaking from an Eric Miller perspective, not on behalf of the board, is that at times there have been topics where I would have preferred at least a follow-up, or if we don't have a follow-up, it just stays top of mind. And I think that that's what committees do for us, is that they force us to at least keep those things top of mind. And so when I think about things like our board bylaws or Long Beach College Promise, like I hate for 2 months, 3 months to go by before we start to have another conversation while having something in our board agenda that says, hey, are we going to talk about it today? We don't have a report. It just keeps it top of mind. So that's just always been my perspective on how to approach important topics like this. I'm not necessarily saying it's right or wrong, I've jokingly used the analogy of Phil Jackson's won 10 championships, but there's been 40 championships won, so there's plenty of ways to win a championship. That's just one way to do so. And so I just wanted to make sure that I shared that perspective.
Well, I think on that note of keeping us winning, yes. on that idea of keeping us winning, I think we've gathered enough information, it seems like, but jump in if I'm getting ahead of myself.
Can we confirm the next steps?
Yes, so Thursday morning, AJ and I will meet, we'll discuss the answers that the board members provided. We'll start our process of some draft bylaws, or at least kind of discussing that issue. I will see if AJ is available for the 16th for the board meeting, either by Zoom or in person. And we will hope to have at least a small presentation on the 16th that would include what you've talked about. We can give you an update as to what AJ and I have done over the next week and a half, and also have AJ there or one of his coaches there to discuss the issues you have brought up today about the actual definition of what we're talking about.
Idea, looking at dates for a potential
And then looking
retreat,
for a potential retreat.
and then asking him where the self-assessment, the board's self-assessment
Yes.
fits into the sequence.
And just to clarify, Wayne, I just so that I'm not confused. Our next meeting is October 16th, not the 8th, not, have you been saying the 18th or the 16th?
I've been saying the 16th.
Okay, yeah.
Is that correct?
Okay,
I think that's correct.
I thought I heard the 18th, and I was like,
I'm a little
am I
out of
off?
touch because, I did retire, but.
Well, no, today's Tuesday, too, that's why. 16th, yeah.
Every day Saturday for Wayne.
Okay, so unless there's any objection, we will adjourn for the morning, is it? No, it's not morning, okay. We will adjourn this special meeting, and we will reconvene at our public meeting at 5 o'clock this evening. And I want to thank everybody for participating in this discussion. I feel like we're going in the right direction. And AJ was absolutely right. This is the hard part, because we're making our own roadmap. So it's going to be tough work, but I feel like we're up to the challenge. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you this evening at 5. This meeting's adjourned.